Hi guys. Tonight we step into a world where snow crunches beneath your boots, and the horizon is nothing but a frozen sweep of plains. The Wild West, usually painted in the warm dust of summer cattle drives and golden sunsets, could also be cruel and bitterly cold. You breathe in, and your lungs sting as if the air itself is glass. The silence is heavy, broken only by the muffled groan of trees under snow. It's beautiful. Yes, but unforgiving. And here you are, alone on the frontier, facing the kind of winter that makes your fingertips ache even through your gloves. You probably won't survive this without a decent shelter. That's the plain truth. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, share your location and the local time down below. I always love seeing where in the world you're listening from. Now, dim the lights. You picture yourself arriving in late autumn, the grass already frosted, the rivers beginning to crust over with thin sheets of ice. There is no hotel, no cabin ready with a fire flickering inside, just a canvas of wilderness. You glance at the sky and wonder if you've made a mistake. Perhaps you should have waited for spring. Yet the promise of land or fortune has pushed you westward. And here you are, boots sinking into snow. Your first thought is simple survival. A roof, four walls, something, anything to keep the wind out. Settlers like you faced this moment constantly. Thousands arrived with wagons creaking behind them, expecting to build their dream homesteads, only to find the clock ticking down toward a deadly season. Some succeeded, some froze before spring, and you stand here, replaying their fears. The air smells of pine resin, sharp and almost medicinal. If you're lucky, there are trees close by. If not, you might be staring at flat prairie with nothing but tall grass that now lies flattened under snow. What do you do? Perhaps you've read that the pioneers sometimes dug hastily into the earth, creating what they call dugouts. It's hardly glamorous, but in this instant, with your breath already frosting your scarf, glamour is the last thing on your mind. The mainstream fact is clear. The first European settlers in these regions often copied the strategies of indigenous peoples who had been enduring these climates for centuries. They learned that even in the harshest winter, shelter could be improvised from what lay at hand: earth, hides, wood, or stone. Without those lessons, survival would have been nearly impossible. Yet you hear a quirky tidbit whispered around the fire. Some desperate travelers supposedly survived by turning their overturned wagons into makeshift huts, tacking hides or quilts against the wheels. Imagine sleeping beneath a wagon bed, horses tied close for warmth, while snow drifted over the wheels. It sounds absurdly primitive, and yet it might have been the only way through a blizzard. Historians still argue whether the Wild West was truly settled faster than people could adapt to its winters, or if folk simply exaggerated the suffering to make their later triumphs seem more heroic. Did people truly walk out onto the prairie with no plan? Or did they carry the folk wisdom of generations? You can't help but wonder as you picture yourself fumbling with half-frozen fingers, stacking logs or sod before the sun dips. The cold wraps around you like an animal's grip, biting, unrelenting. Your ears burn, your toes lose feeling, and suddenly you understand why every settlement, every story of frontier life begins with shelter. Without it, nothing else matters. Gold, cattle, land, freedom, it all disappears if you can't wake up alive tomorrow. You hear the whistle of wind tunneling through bare branches, and you press your scarf tighter to your face. The land is so vast, the sky so endlessly grey, you feel small, almost swallowed. But you keep moving, dragging wood, or shoveling earth, or even pulling hide from your wagon, because tonight you must have a wall between you and that cruel wind. You imagine the crackle of a fire, the glow of embers against stone, the sigh of relief when warmth finally seeps back into your bones. It becomes the only thing you can think of, the prize that waits for effort. Your mind drifts, softly, as the snow deepens. The sound of your boots crunching becomes almost rhythmic, lulling. You picture the cabins you've seen in storybooks, but here, in this frozen reality, you know it will start rougher. It will be clumsy, rushed, not beautiful. Yet, like the settlers before you promise yourself this. The winter may be long, but as long as you have walls even crooked, drafty ones you will endure. The Wild West greets you not with the romance of sunsets and open plains, but with the icy demand of survival. And so, shivering, you take your first steps into the art of building warmth out of wilderness. You bend down, your hands chilled even through your gloves, and scoop a lump of earth. It crumbles, damp from the recent snowmelt, sticky enough to cling to your palms. You look around and notice something. The land itself might be your salvation. Grass roots grip soil into tough clumps, and suddenly you understand why the old pioneers cut sod and stacked it into walls. A sod house may not be pretty, but in this vastness, beauty is not the point. Survival is. The prairie, stretching endlessly before you, hides its secret beneath that frozen blanket. The soil, held together by dense mats of roots, comes up in heavy slabs when cut with a spade. Each piece, thick and stubborn, feels almost like a brick. You line one next to another, imagining a wall taking shape, dark and earthen, thick enough to stand against the wind. You may never have thought dirt could feel like safety, but here in the cold, it does. The mainstream fact is simple enough. In the Great Plains, especially where trees were scarce, settlers relied heavily on sod houses, or soddies, throughout the 19th century. Entire families spent weeks stacking cut sod into walls a foot thick, then smoothing the inside with a plaster of mud or lime. Sod was plentiful, insulating, and free. It was the very ground under their feet transformed into shelter. Yet, there's a quirky side to these earthy homes. Visitors sometimes joked that sod houses sprouted grass on their roofs, giving the illusion that sheep could graze above while people lived below. Imagine looking up from your supper table to see tufts of green waving from the ceiling. Not exactly the wallpaper you dreamed of, but practical enough. And mice loved those grassy ridges too, skittering across at night like tiny, uninvited guests. Historians still debate whether sod houses were more miserable or more miraculous. On one hand, they leaked mud in rainstorms, smelled of damp earth, and harbored insects. On the other, they were cozy against wind, fireproof compared to timber cabins, and often the only thing standing between a family and frostbite. Was life inside them a nightmare or a clever adaptation? That depends on whose diary you read. As you picture yourself stacking those sod bricks, you feel the weight of each one in your arms, damp, heavy, squishing slightly against your coat as you lift. The smell is rich, like wet hay mixed with clay, oddly comforting in its familiarity. You slam one block down next to another, pressing them tight. The wall grows inch by inch, the earthen rhythm steady, meditative. The wind whistles outside, but inside this circle of walls, the sting dulls. You begin to sense the promise of warmth. The sound of your spade digging into frozen soil echoes across the plain, thudding and scraping, punctuated by your own sharp breaths. Each block you cut feels like a victory over the cold, a piece of safety carved directly from the land. Your muscles ache, but the rhythm is hypnotic. Step, cut, lift, stack. Step, cut, lift, stack. It becomes less of a chore and more of a mantra, a steady beat against the silence. Still, your mind drifts to the floors. You imagine waking in the night to find a small trickle of mud dripping down the wall, spattering onto your quilt. You can almost hear your partner groaning, muttering about sleeping in a swamp, and yet, when dawn rises and the snow outside sparkles like crushed glass, you would smile because you are still alive. The walls may weep, but they keep you breathing. You remember stories of settlers decorating sod interiors to soften the gloom, curtains hung across dirt windows, colourful quilts tacked against raw earth, even old newspapers pasted to walls like wallpaper. You picture the print curling in the damp, headlines about distant cities half dissolved by moisture, but still a reminder of the world beyond the prairie. Strange comfort, but comfort nonetheless. The sod house hums with quiet life. In your imagination, the smell of wood smoke mingles with the damp earth scent of the walls. The firelight glows against earthen ridges, turning them golden, almost soft. You settle onto a rough bench, quilt wrapped tight, and listen. The wind outside sounds muffled now, like waves crashing far away instead of claws scratching at your skin. You lean back and feel the cool, rough texture of the wall against your shoulder. It feels alive, almost pulsing with the land itself. The sod's insulation keeps the inside warm long after the fire dies down, a steady embrace from the soil that birthed it. You're grateful, even as a little dirt crumbles onto your sleeve. Gratitude is a powerful warmth of its own. Sometimes you imagine settlers boasting that they lived in harmony with the earth, though in truth it was more desperation than philosophy. And yet, there's something humbling in knowing that when the prairie tried to kill them, they answered with the prairie itself. You look at your walls of sod and feel a quiet triumph. It may not last forever. Spring rains might melt them, mice might gnaw through them, but for this winter, they are yours. Your thoughts drift again, lazily now, to how these sod walls connect you to generations of survival. Every block you lay is a memory of someone else's struggle, someone else's determination not to let winter win. You can almost hear their voices, men, women, children, cutting, stacking, patching, their laughter muffled, their curses muted, but their will to endure always strong. The fire crackles, the walls hold, and as you close your eyes, you realize dirt has never felt so noble. The sod may crumble one day, grass may sprout from the roof, mice may skitter in the corners, but tonight, it's a fortress against the endless cold. And for now, that's enough. You stand at the edge of a forest, boots crunching over frosted needles, and your breath curls like smoke into the cold. Behind you stretches the open prairie with its fragile sod houses and dugouts, but here among the trees, another kind of shelter whispers to you. Logs. Solid, straight, unyielding. Timber offers more than dirt ever could. It promises strength, height, and permanence. You step closer, running your gloved hand over the rough bark of a pine, and already you picture it lying across another, interlocked into a square, a log cabin. The first settlers who stumbled into wooded regions of the West saw these towering trees not just as shade or firewood, but as walls, roofs, and entire lives waiting to be built. The mainstream fact is that log cabins were among the most iconic forms of pioneer housing. Their roots stretched back to Scandinavian and Eastern European building traditions, brought over by immigrants who knew precisely how to fit one log snugly atop another. A properly built cabin, they said, could hold heat like a sealed chest and keep out even the fiercest winter storm. But there is a quirky tidbit that always tickles the imagination. Some cabins were supposedly built so hastily that settlers didn't even bother to peel the bark off the logs. You can picture it, walls lined with shaggy bark, insects burrowed deep within, the whole place scratching and crackling like a giant animal in the night. Guests might have laughed nervously, wondering if the house itself would crawl away on legs made of pine beetles. Still, when you're shivering in a snowstorm, bark becomes just another layer of insulation. Historians still argue whether log cabins were more efficient than sod houses in the most brutal climates. Timber kept out the wind better, yet gaps between logs' chinks needed filling with mud, clay, or moss. Without constant patching, cabins could be as drafty as sieves. Some scholars suggest many early settlers suffered frostbite, not outside, but inside their poorly chinked cabins. Others insist that once properly sealed, these cabins were warm havens, rivaling even the sturdiness of stone houses back east. You heft an axe in your mind, its blade gleaming faintly in the pale light. The air carries the sweet, sharp scent of pine. The first strike echoes a deep, resonant thud that vibrates through your arms. Chips of wood fly, each stroke a rhythm that warms you despite the chill. Thud, crack, gasp. Thud, crack, gasp. It is backbreaking work, but also hypnotic. You feel like you are carving time itself, shaping the hours into something tangible. When the tree finally groans, shivers, and crashes to the ground, the sound rumbles through the forest, startling birds into sudden flight. You rest your forehead against the haft of the axe, sweat cooling quickly in the wind. One tree down, dozens to go. A cabin isn't just a shelter, it is a forest transformed into home. You drag the log, boots slipping on icy ground, and imagine stacking it atop another. The corners notch neatly, one crossing the other like fingers clasped in prayer. You press mud into the seams, stuffing moss into the cracks, feeling the cold seep away. The wall grows higher, enclosing you in a cocoon of wood. Already you hear the future crackle of fire bouncing from the surfaces, the scent of pine mingling with smoke, the low groan of wood adjusting as it settles into place. Inside such a cabin, the atmosphere is close, intimate. The wooden walls smell faintly of resin and damp earth, and when the fire burns, the scent deepens into something sweet, almost syrupy. Your hand trails along the grain of the log, smooth in some places, jagged in others. Each imperfection is a fingerprint of the forest, now sheltering you. But cabins were not without their troubles. Imagine lying in bed and hearing tiny scratches inside the log's mice, finding their way through cracks, insects waking from their wooden burrows. Some diaries mention settlers waking to find frost on the inside walls, sparkling faintly in the firelight. You shiver, pulling the quilt tighter, marveling that even solid wood sometimes failed against the vast cold. Still, the log cabin represented something deeper than shelter. It was a claim, a stake in the wilderness, proof that you weren't just passing through, that you belonged. Neighbors might come help raise the walls, their laughter echoing in the trees as logs were hoisted and dropped into place. Each thud of wood was a promise. We will survive here. Your imagination lingers on one such raising. The sound of men's boots crunching, women's skirts swishing, children chasing each other between stumps. Someone passes around a jug of cider, the steam of hot stew rising from a nearby fire. Laughter competes with the sound of saws biting wood. The air feels warmer, even though the snow still falls, because together they are building something lasting. At night, when the roof finally rests atop the cabin, you step inside. The fire blazes in the stone hearth, its glow licking across the rough log walls. Shadows dance, flicker, bend. The wind howls outside, rattling branches, but in here it becomes a faint, distant murmur. You run your hands across the walls and feel their solidity. No mud dripping, no crumbling sod, just timber standing proud. You lie down on a rough straw mattress, quilt tucked tight, and listen to the fire crackle. Your body relaxes in a way it hasn't since stepping onto this frozen land. Even as you drift towards sleep, a thought lingers. This cabin, like the sod house, is not perfect. It creaks, it leaks smoke, it needs constant repair. But here in the Wild West, perfection isn't the goal. Survival is. And with each notch of wood, each crack stuffed with moss, you edge closer to spring. Your eyelids grow heavy. The fire sighs low, embers glowing faintly. Beyond the walls, wolves may howl, winds may lash, snow may pile against the door. But inside, the warmth holds. You are wrapped not just in quilts, but in the strength of trees, in the patience of hands, in the stubborn will of those who refuse to let winter win. And as you drift off, you smile, because the cabin is more than shelter, it is defiance carved in wood. The forest slowly thins, and once more you find yourself on the edge of open land. Out here, trees are fewer, but settlers do not simply give up when timber runs short. You glance at your wagon, canvas stretched across bent ribs of wood, the fabric already stiff from frost. For many, This flimsy sheet was the very first roof they had in the wilderness. A tent against a western winter feels laughable, yet thousands began this way. What's generally accepted from diaries and letters is that canvas shelters were the earliest step before permanent cabins. Families traveled with little more than wagons and cloth, so they stretched what they had. At first, it was a temporary measure set up for a few nights, a week at most. But in the face of an early storm, those canvas walls often became a lifeline, giving pioneers precious time before sturdier construction could rise. And there's a curious account that drifts through memory. Travelers sometimes lined the inside of their tents with newspaper pages, pasting them up with flour paste to block the wind. Imagine falling asleep with headlines staring down at you, the ink smudging in the damp. The paper didn't just block drafts, it reminded families that a wider world still existed, buzzing with news they had left far behind. Experts can't quite agree on just how effective canvas really was for winter living. Some claim it trapped enough body heat to make survival bearable, especially when paired with a small iron stove. Others argue that canvas was little better than sleeping under the stars, a cruel trick of optimism rather than true shelter. The truth perhaps lies in the middle, flimsy alone, but serviceable with constant fire and clever reinforcement. Picture yourself crawling into one of these tents. The canvas walls billow slightly in the wind, a low flap that keeps rhythm with your heartbeat. The smell is sharp, tarred fabric mixed with the smoke of a struggling fire. You brush your hand along the fabric and feel the rough weave, stiff and unyielding against your fingers. Light seeps through in pale, ghostly streaks. It is both claustrophobic and fragile, a reminder of just how thin the line between survival and exposure can be. Your breath fogs the air inside, rising in faint wisps that catch the firelight. The little stove in the corner crackles, glowing faintly red, its thin chimney pipe poking through the tent's crown. Every few minutes you rise, feed it another stick of wood, then settle again under your quilt. Sleep never comes easily, the cold presses too close, too insistent, but still, the canvas holds. You imagine yourself outside in the wind, canvas creaking, snow hissing as strikes taut cloth. The air smells of pine smoke carried on the gale. Inside, the faintest warmth lingers, enough to keep fingers from going numb. You whisper thanks for even this thin barrier, because without it, you would be just another body stiffening under the stars. Over time, settlers realized these tents could evolve. Timber was scavenged, rough poles set as frames, planks leaned against the sides. The canvas became a skin stretched tight over a skeleton of wood. Each layer added a little more defense, until one day the cloth was replaced entirely by boards. A shack, then a cabin, grew slowly where once only a flapping tent stood. The process itself felt like breathing life into the wilderness. Each nail hammered, each board set against the wind, each patch of mud plastered against gaps, turned the fragile into the formidable. Families would sometimes leave the canvas hanging inside the finished cabin as an inner lining, a reminder of the tent that carried them through their first bitter nights. Imagine sitting at a wooden table, running your fingers across the wall, and still feeling the old fabric hidden beneath. There's an almost musical rhythm in your memory of that transformation. The pounding of hammers, the squeak of leather harness as oxen dragged logs, the sigh of canvas settling over wood. At night, you hear coyotes yipping beyond the firelight, but you pull the canvas flap closed, and inside, it feels like another world. A fragile one, yes, but yours. The human senses cling to details in such fragile dwellings. The glow of embers painting shadows across fabric. The faint, sweet smell of dried grass, stuffed between ground and tent to block drafts. The constant hiss of wind outside, muffled only slightly by stretched cloth. And the sound of your own breath, steady, stubborn, proof that you are still here. There's something humbling in knowing that generations passed their first winters in nothing more than canvas, patched and reinforced as best as they could. It wasn't grand. It wasn't permanent. but it was enough to get them to the next season, enough to turn despair into determination, enough to bridge the gap between dream and reality. When you picture yourself now, seated inside one of those makeshift shelters, you feel both vulnerable and defiant. Vulnerable, because you know how thin the barrier truly is. Defiant, because even so, it stands. The cold has not yet claimed you, and as long as the canvas quivers above your head and the fire flickers at your feet, you know you've beaten back the night. Your eyes grow heavy, lulled by the constant rustle of cloth and the faint warmth of flame. Outside, snow falls steady, blanketing the world in silence. Inside, your heart slows, your body loosens. You know tomorrow you will wake, drag wood, patch holes, and dream of boards replacing fabric. But tonight, this fragile cocoon of canvas is enough to hold the darkness back. The tent fades from your memory, and you step forward into a clearing where something sturdier glows faintly against the dusk. A hearth, a pile of river stones carefully stacked into a low wall, their surfaces blackened by smoke. You crouch, run your fingers over the rough grit, and feel the echo of heat long since faded. A home without a fire is only a box, but a hearth turns four walls into a living refuge. Most records agree that on the western frontier, a fireplace was often the very first thing built. Before windows, before floors, even before a proper roof, families stacked stones into a hearth and chimney. With it came not only warmth, but a place to cook, to gather, and to imagine that the wilderness could become home. Without fire contained, settlers might as well have been camping in the snow. An odd little detail sometimes emerges in travelers' letters. People occasionally used stones pulled directly from creek beds, unaware that when heated too quickly, the trapped moisture inside could make them explode. Picture sitting peacefully by the fire, only for a river rock to burst with a sharp crack, scattering embers across the floor. Some pioneers joked nervously about rock grenades, but the risk didn't stop them from hauling buckets of smooth stone up from the river. It was simply too convenient. There is still disagreement among researchers about how efficient those first chimneys truly were. Some argue they funneled smoke well, keeping the air inside surprisingly clear. Others note that many were little more than crude clay flues, collapsing in storms or belching smoke until everyone's eyes watered. Was the frontier hearth a marvel of folk engineering, or just a smoky compromise? The debate lingers. You kneel closer in imagination, feeding dry twigs into the mouth of the fireplace. The air inside is frigid until the first spark catches. Then, slowly, a faint crackle begins. The smell of resinous pine smoke curls upward, sharp and sweet. Sparks pop like miniature fireworks, and you lean back, mesmerized. Soon, larger logs hiss as they burn, filling the cabin with warmth that seeps into your chilled bones. The sensory world of a frontier hearth was intoxicating. The glow of firelight painted golden ripples across log walls. Shadows swayed and bowed with every flicker, turning rough rooms into places of drama. The crackle was steady, hypnotic, like a lullaby sung in wood and flame. The heat pressed forward, soft at first, then heavy, until frost on the inside walls melted into thin rivulets. And then there was the taste. Pots dangled from iron hooks, hissing as stews bubbled within. Bread baked in cast-iron Dutch ovens, filling the air with warmth more comforting than quilts. You break off a crust in your imagination, steam rising against your face, and realize the hearth was not only about warmth of body but warmth of spirit. Families laughed, argued, prayed, all within arm's reach of the fire. Of course, danger lingered constantly. Chimneys cracked, sparks leapt, roofs caught. Children were warned not to wander too near, yet they always did, drawn by the flicker of flame. Some cabins built clay and stick chimneys that collapsed in storms, leaving families scrambling to rebuild in the snow. Others lined hearths with iron plates scavenged from broken stoves, anything to keep the fire contained. The Wild West was never forgiving, even in the comfort of one's own home. Imagine the rhythm of a winter's evening here. The wind howls outside, rattling shutters and hissing through the cracks. Inside, the hearth roars with defiance. Someone stirs a pot, the spoon clinking gently against iron. Children whisper in corners, quilts pulled tight, their faces glowing red in the firelight. Adults lean closer to one another, talking in low voices, the flames painting their eyes with reflection. The fire becomes more than heat. It becomes the heartbeat of the house. The texture of life settles around you, the smell of singed wool where a blanket brushed too close to sparks, the faint grit of ash underfoot, tracked in by boots, the soft sigh of a log shifting as it burns, sending a shower of sparks into the flue. The world outside may be white and lifeless, but here, within stone and flame, life pulses warmly. You think about how settlers marked time by the fire. They woke at dawn to coax embers back into flame, spent evenings feeding logs until they dared to sleep, and measured the passing of hours by how far the coals had fallen. There's something almost meditative about this rhythm, a surrender to the dance of flame. It made the wilderness feel less infinite, less indifferent. Even as your mind drifts, you remember stories of hearths glowing so hot that families claimed they forgot it was winter. Perhaps it was exaggeration, perhaps not. Either way, the stone hearth carried them through storms that howled for days, through nights when wolves prowled near the door, through months when snow buried roofs. It was a fragile miracle, built from rocks and sweat, but it worked. And as you lean back now, eyes heavy, the fire still glows steady in your imagination. Sparks drift upward, vanishing into the chimney. The stones radiate quiet heat, the kind that lingers long after flames fade. Your body loosens, your breath slows. Beyond the walls, the cold remains merciless. But here, before the hearth, you have found not just warmth but something like peace. The hearth's glow softens into embers in your mind, and you step back out into the icy air. Snow drifts higher around your boots now, muffling every sound except the crunch of your own steps. You glance at the cabin wall beside you and notice something peculiar: snow packed thick against its base. At first, you think it's just the storms doing, but then you realize this was deliberate. The settlers discovered that snow, ironically enough, could be used as insulation. It is well established that snow is a surprisingly effective barrier against cold. As strange as it seems, the trapped pockets of air within packed snow actually keep heat from escaping. That's why igloos, built by Arctic peoples for generations, could remain comfortably above freezing even in brutal temperatures. On the western frontier, families soon learned the same principle, banking snow against the sides of cabins and sod houses to block the wind's icy fingers. One curious story told in homesteaders' letters recalls children being given the chore of snow chinking. While adults mended walls with clay or moss, the youngsters shoveled snow right up against gaps. They turned it into a game, piling it as high as they could, until cabins looked half swallowed by drifts. The work kept them warm through movement, and the result made the inside far cozier. Scholars remain divided over just how widespread this practice was. Some argue that snowbanking was used regularly, particularly in timber-poor regions where sod houses leaked badly. Others suggest it was more an act of desperation in unusually harsh winters. There is no unanimous answer, only scattered anecdotes, diary lines, and the occasional sketch showing walls half buried in whiteness. Imagine yourself stepping outside into a storm, shovel in hand, and deliberately piling snow against your own home. The wind whips your face raw, snowflakes sting your eyes, but each shovelful pressed against the wall feels like a defense. The sound is muffled, a dull, hollow thud of shovel meeting drift, followed by the gentle sigh of powder settling. Your fingers ache, but you keep working, because you know that this wall of snow will hold the warmth inside where you need it most. When you return indoors, the difference is immediate. The wind no longer whistles through cracks quite as sharply. The air feels heavier, more stable. It is still cold, but less biting, less cruel. You brush snowflakes from your shoulders, stomp the drifts off your boots, and settle by the fire, grateful for the strange protection given by the very element you feared. The sensory details deepen. You can smell the faint dampness where snow presses against wood, the musty scent of earth mingling with icy freshness. You touch the wall inside, expecting cold, but it feels almost neutral, the snow outside insulating more than freezing. You hear silence, thick and padded, as if the whole world has been wrapped in wool. Even the storm's howl sounds distant now, muted by your own handmade fortress of white. Of course, risks came with this method. Too much snow piled on a roof could collapse it. Packed too tightly against poorly built walls, moisture might seep in and rot wood come spring. Families balanced on a thin line between protection and disaster. And yet, when temperatures plunged, they often had no choice. Survival meant improvisation, even if the cure carried its own risks. In your mind's eye, you picture children laughing as they shovel, unaware of the danger. Their cheeks glow red, their breaths puff like little chimneys, and their giggles echo strangely in the muffled air. For them, it is play. For the parents watching from the doorway, it is insurance against death. The contrast lingers with you, snowball fights blending into life or death engineering. Sometimes, neighbors would even compete, boasting about who could bury their home deeper in drifts. A visitor might stumble into a settlement and see nothing but a line of rooftops poking above white hills, smoke rising in lazy curls. Inside those snow-wrapped homes, families sat snug, their windows frosted into lace patterns, their breath invisible in the thicker warmth. The quiet in such moments must have been profound. No creak of trees, no call of birds, no distant river, only the crackle of the hearth and the occasional drip where melting snow seeped through. The cold world outside was silenced, transformed into insulation, and inside, life continued in a cocoon of strange comfort. You lean back and close your eyes. The memory of snow pressing close feels heavy but secure, like an embrace from the land itself. It is not hostile in this moment. It is helpful, protective, paradoxically gentle. You hear nothing but your own breath, steady and slow, and the faint heartbeat of a fire that never seems to go out. Tomorrow, perhaps, the snow will shift, the wind will rise, the walls will groan. But tonight, you let yourself trust in the white barrier you've built. You sigh, sinking deeper into quilts, and let the muffled silence cradle you towards sleep. The muffled silence of snow gives way to another memory, the smell of leather and musk, the feel of thick fur beneath your hand. You stand inside a shelter not made of wood or sod, but of hides, dark and supple, stretched tightly across a frame. Buffalo hides, stitched together with sinew, turned into walls that seem to breathe warmth back at their makers. Most surviving accounts confirm that both indigenous peoples and later settlers relied heavily on buffalo hides for winter coverings. These hides were not just blankets but architectural materials pinned across doorways, draped over roofs, or stretched over wooden poles to form whole shelters. When properly cured, buffalo hide was dense, resistant to wind, and astonishingly good at holding heat. One strange little anecdote drifts through oral history. Families sometimes layered multiple hides with dried grass or even old newspapers sandwiched in between, creating what might have been the frontier version of insulation panels. Imagine running your hand over such a wall, soft on the outside, but thick, lumpy, and oddly warm to the touch. Researchers continue to puzzle over just how widespread buffalo hide shelters were among settlers themselves. Many records emphasize indigenous expertise, especially plains tribes, who perfected the use of hides in tipis and coverings. Some argue that homesteaders borrowed these techniques extensively during desperate winters. Others believe most settlers clung to wood and sod, using hides only as temporary fixes. The line between cultural exchange and survival necessity is blurred, and it remains a subject of lively debate. You picture yourself stepping into such a hide-draped shelter. The doorway hangs heavy with a flap of fur, brushing your shoulders as you duck inside. At once, the air changes. Outside, The wind screamed across the plains. Inside it is hushed, warmer, and perfumed faintly with smoke and the lingering animal scent of leather. You kneel down and touch the wall. The surface is cool but pliable, and it seems to trap the fire's heat, sending it back into the room in gentle waves. The fire burns low in the center, its glow reflecting against the hides, making them shine with an oily sheen. Shadows ripple across the curved walls, soft and undulating, like the inside of a living creature. The crackle of flame feels close here, more intimate, amplified by the enclosed space. Each sound echoes faintly, a reminder that this shelter is less rigid than logs or stone, more like a skin stretched across the bones of earth. You breathe deeply. The air tastes of smoke and fur, a mixture that clings to your throat but comforts you all the same. The quilts spread on the floor feel softer, warmer, heavier than before. You realize that every part of the buffalo has gone to use the hides as walls, the bones as tools, the sinew as thread. Nothing is wasted. It is a kind of respect for survival, a truth that settlers slowly learned from tribes who had long understood this land. Yet there are inconveniences too. Rain could soak into hides, making them sag. Freezing temperatures stiffened them like boards, difficult to move. And when the wind rose high, the walls rippled, groaned, even threatened to tear. Imagine lying awake at night, listening to the fabric strain and snap, half believing the shelter itself might fly away. Still, compared to the cutting wind outside, the uncertainty of hides was worth the gamble. The daily life inside these hide-covered spaces was rich in sensory detail. Children played near the fire, their laughter echoing softly. Women stitched and mended the seams with careful fingers, their needles glinting in firelight. Men hung meat strips from poles above, letting smoke cure them. The scent of cooking mingled with the constant leather musk, wrapping the air in layers of survival. Sometimes, a gust outside made the walls tremble, and ashes scattered from the fire. You imagine pulling a hide tighter across the door, weighing it with stones, and settling back down with a sigh. It is not a palace. It leaks, it sways, it smells, but it holds the cold at bay, and that is enough to feel grateful. Stories tell of travelers who stepped into such dwellings and felt overwhelmed by the closeness, the way heat gathered quickly, the way every voice sounded louder, the way smoke lingered low. Some complained, some praised it, but all admitted the same thing. Stepping back into the wind afterward felt like being slapped by knives. The hide house, for all its flaws, was a sanctuary. As you sit now in imagination, wrapped in a quilt, the fire glowing, the hides shifting gently like breathing lungs, you feel lulled in stillness. The walls seem alive, protective, almost maternal in their embrace. Beyond them, wolves may howl, snow may drift, winds may lash. Inside, you are cocooned in the gifts of the great animal that once roamed these plains in thundering herds. You close your eyes and think about that how survival on the frontier was not just about ingenuity, but about borrowing from the land and from those who had lived with it for centuries. The hides remind you that nothing here was wasted, and everything carried the weight of life given for life preserved. Your body loosens, the fire pops softly, the hide walls sigh with the wind's pressure, and in that half-dreaming moment you understand why settlers, for all their hardship, sometimes spoke of winter nights as almost tender, when the world shrank to a circle of warmth, fur, and flame, and the wilderness pressed close, but did not conquer. The faint animal scent of hides lingers in your imagination as you step onward, into a valley where the land itself offers a different gift. The soil here is red and thick, sticky when damp, almost like clay between your fingers. You kneel, scoop up a handful, and feel its weight dense, malleable, and waiting to be shaped. Adobe. Out on the far edges of the West, settlers learned to mold the very earth into bricks, crafting homes that trapped the day's warmth and released it slowly through the bitter nights. What's generally accepted from archaeological surveys is that adobe had been used for centuries before Europeans ever came westward. Pueblo peoples built multi-story complexes of clay and straw long before pioneers stumbled into the deserts. When settlers found themselves in those same climates, hot by day, freezing by night, they adapted the technique, molding bricks from clay mixed with straw, then drying them in the sunday. These bricks, stacked and plastered, made walls that could outlast timber and resist flames, all while keeping interiors astonishingly temperate. Strangely enough, there are accounts of people adding unusual ingredients to their adobe mix, everything from animal hair to ground cactus pulp, even horse manure. Each addition gave the bricks a slightly different strength or flexibility. Imagine yourself stirring a pit of mud with straw and cactus pads, laughing nervously at the mess, but knowing it will soon become a wall thick enough to withstand a blizzard. There remains scholarly disagreement about just how far adobe spread outside the Southwest. Some evidence suggests it became fairly common in parts of Texas and New Mexico, while others argue that its use remained regional, tied closely to indigenous influence. The written record is patchy, leaving us to wonder, did settlers embrace adobe widely or only when no other option stood? You picture the process now, step by step. First, clay and straw are stomped together in shallow pits, your boots squelching as you grind fibers into mud. The smell is earthy, sharp with wet straw, and oddly sweet in the warmth of the Sunday. Then, wooden molds are set down, rectangles pressed into the mix, each one filled and smoothed. Hours later, the bricks are lifted carefully to dry in rows, sun-baked into firmness. You can hear the faint crackle as they shrink, the whisper of straw fibers holding them together. When stacked into walls, the adobe feels cool to your fingertips. The texture is sandy, a little rough, almost chalky. Inside such a home, the air is still, heavy with the faint scent of clay. At night, when frost settles outside, the walls seem to breathe out the day's stored heat, warming the small room slowly, steadily. You curl up in a corner, quilt around your shoulders, and marvel that earth itself has become a kind of thermal blanket. Yet adobe brought challenges too. Heavy rains could erode walls if they weren't carefully plastered. Settlers often smeared them with more mud or lime wash to keep the water out, but storms always threatened collapse. Imagine lying awake while thunder rolls and rain hammers the roof, praying the walls will not melt into sludge around you. A comfort and a curse, all at once. Daily life within adobe houses was rich in sensory rhythm. The soft light filtered in through tiny windows, bouncing golden off the clay walls. The floor beneath your feet felt cool, even in summer. The air smelled faintly of earth and smoke, blending into something grounding, something steady. You could run your hand along the wall and feel the grooves where straw peeked through, a reminder that these were not factory bricks but handmade, imprinted with the sweat of survival. Families found creative ways to decorate these earthen interiors. Some whitewashed walls until they gleamed, bright against the firelight. Others painted them with simple colors, red or blue, turning the clay canvas into art. And many simply embraced the plainness, seeing beauty in the honest texture of soil shaped into a home. Neighbors might gather inside one adobe dwelling on a stormy night, huddled around the hearth. The thick walls muted the wind so thoroughly that conversation felt private, cocooned. The sound of rain outside became a distant patter, while inside voices rose soft and warm. You picture children chasing one another in circles, their laughter bouncing faintly in the clay chamber. The walls, unyielding, trapped every sound, turning the house itself into an echo chamber of life. There is a comfort here that differs from wood or hides. Wood creaks and shifts, hides ripple and flap, but adobe is solid, silent. You lean against it and feel unmoving strength, as if the earth itself has wrapped you in its arms. That steadiness calms you, makes your shoulders drop, your breath deepen. It's as if the land has decided, for once, not to fight you, but to hold you steady through the long winter night. Of course, adobe could also feel claustrophobic. With no tall windows and thick walls, light was scarce. Smoke from poorly vented fires might linger, stinging your eyes. In deep winter, you might find yourself longing for a creak of wood, the sight of snow, anything but endless brown walls. Yet still, when dawn rose and you opened the door to find snow piled high, you thanked those walls for keeping you warm. The adobe home stands as both a borrowed wisdom and an adaptation, a dialogue between old traditions and new settlers. As you sit inside one now in your imagination, the fire glowing faintly against clay, you feel yourself becoming part of that dialogue. Your breath warms the room, your footsteps echo softly. Your presence itself adds another layer to walls that have endured for centuries. Your eyes grow heavy again. The clay radiates a slow warmth, the kind that seeps into your bones and stays. You lie back, cheek against the cool plaster, quilt pulled tight, and listen. Outside, the night rages cold. Inside, the earth holds you gently. You drift, comforted by the paradox. That soil, fragile underfoot, could be reshaped into strength enough to guard your dreams. You leave behind the sun-baked adobe walls in your mind's eye and wander northward into a harsher landscape. Here, the prairie rises into hills, and the wind howls over them like a wolf. Trees are scarce, stones are few, and snow sweeps freely across the land. In such places, settlers discovered another way to survive. They dug into the very hillsides, carving homes straight from the earth. These were dugouts, half burrow, half house, the most primitive of shelters and yet sometimes the most enduring. Most written accounts from pioneers agree that dugouts were common where timber was absent, particularly across the Great Plains. Families drove their wagons into a bank or hillside, cut into the slope with shovels, and fashioned a front wall from sod or wood. Roofs were made from whatever lay at hand: brush, poles, sod, even wagon boards. It wasn't glamorous, but the earth provided thick insulation. In winter, dugouts often stayed warmer than the flimsy cabins above ground. One odd note preserved in diaries is that dugouts often sprouted wildflowers on their roofs come spring. Because the top layer was sod, grass and flowers kept growing, so it was said a dugout could look like nothing more than a meadow with a door in it. Imagine approaching your own home and finding daisies waving cheerfully from the roof, disguising the fact that a family huddled beneath. Specialists remain divided on how livable these structures really were. Some insist dugouts were safer, warmer, and more comfortable than log cabins, at least until families could build proper houses. Others argue they were dank, smoky, and filled with vermin, barely better than sleeping in a ditch. Letters and journals give both extremes, some praising dugouts as snug havens, others damning them as holes fit only for moles. You take up a shovel in your imagination and begin digging into a frozen hillside. Each strike echoes with a dull thud, the soil hard as stone. Your breath steams, your muscles ache, but slowly a hollow begins to form. You drag out clods of dirt, boots slipping on the icy slope, until the space feels large enough to stand inside. The air smells rich, damp earth, sharp and mineral. Cold seeps from the soil, but the wind is gone. Already you sense the difference. A sod wall rises at the front, rough and uneven. You press sod blocks into place, stacking them thick until only a crude doorway remains. Overhead, you lay brush, then poles, then sod again. The roof sags, but it holds. You step inside and duck low, the ceiling just above your head. Light filters faintly through cracks, and you patch them with mud. The silence settles heavy. You have made a burrow, a cave, a home. Inside, the sensations are unique. The walls feel damp, gritty under your palm, but the air is still. The smell of soil mixes with the faint sweetness of smoke from your fire. You spread straw across the floor, and it rustles underfoot. The sound is soft, muffled, nothing like the creak of timber. You light a small fire near the entrance, and smoke coils uncertainly upward, escaping through a crude flue. Your eyes water, but the warmth builds. Families who lived in dugouts often recalled the closeness. Ceiling beams dripped with condensation, sometimes dropping onto quilts in the night. Mice scurried through the straw. Snakes occasionally slithered in seeking warmth. You imagine lying awake, hearing the faint hiss of scales over straw, pulling the blanket tighter in fear. Yet still, in the worst storms, dugouts did their job. They kept people alive. Neighbors would sometimes joke that prairie families lived in cellars without houses above them. Yet gatherings inside could be lively. You picture a storm raging outside, wind shrieking across the open land. Inside, lamplight flickers against damp earthen walls. Children sit cross-legged, telling stories. Adults sip weak coffee, their voices echoing softly. The dugout may look miserable from outside, but within, it becomes a womb of sound and warmth. When spring comes, the dugout changes. The roof sprouts grass, even flowers. Birds land overhead, pecking at seeds. You step outside and laugh at the sight, a house disguised as a meadow. Visitors have to be shown the door, otherwise they would walk right past, assuming the slope hides nothing more than rabbits. And yet, danger always lingers. Heavy rains might collapse the roof. Flash floods could drown the hollow. The damp encouraged mold, which settled in lungs. Still, many families lived entire years in dugouts, raising children in earth-walled rooms, cooking meals over smoky fires, sleeping beneath sod ceilings. Diaries note children remembering these homes with surprising fondness, recalling the coziness even amid hardship. As you rest in your imagined dugout, quilt pulled tight, the earth walls close around you like a heavy blanket. The silence is deep, broken only by the fire's sigh and the occasional drip from the roof. Your body relaxes despite the damp, because the wind outside cannot touch you here. For a time you belong to the earth, and the earth keeps you safe. You drift in thought, marveling at the paradox, that the same soil meant for planting and burial also became refuge. Dugouts were crude, perhaps undignified, yet they whispered a truth. Sometimes the simplest hole in the ground is all that stands between life and death on the frontier. And as you close your eyes, lulled by the muffled quiet, you accept that truth, grateful for its embrace. The earthen dugout fades behind you as you step into a place far less quiet, far less solitary. The sound reaches your ears first, a hammer striking metal, boots thudding against boards, voices calling over one another. You've wandered into a railroad shanty town, one of those makeshift settlements that sprouted like mushrooms along the growing tracks of the West. Here, survival in winter was less about permanence and more about improvisation. It is well documented that wherever rail lines stretched, small temporary towns sprang up to houseworkers. They were thrown together quickly, often with scrap lumber from supply depots, sheets of tar paper, and salvaged canvas. No one expected them to last, yet men and their families huddled within them through brutal winters. The roofs sagged, the walls rattled, but they were shelters of necessity, erected in days rather than weeks. A peculiar detail that appears in workers' accounts is the use of railroad materials themselves as building supplies. Discarded ties became beams, while bent rails were sometimes hammered into door frames or even used as makeshift anchors for walls. Imagine sleeping in a shack where your bed leaned against an iron rail once destined for the main line. It was both absurd and resourceful, proof that nothing went to waste when survival was at stake. There is continuing disagreement among social historians about whether these shanty towns provided a sense of community or only misery. Some describe them as lively, filled with camaraderie, singing, and shared meals despite hardship. Others paint them as bleak, cold, and disease-ridden, barely better than tents strung along the tracks. Perhaps both are true, depending on the town, the winter, and the resilience of those who lived there. You step into one of these rough shacks now in your mind. The walls are thin, patched together with uneven boards. Tar paper flaps loosely, its edges crackling in the wind. A lantern swings from a bent nail, its flame trembling against the draught. The air smells of kerosene, tar, and the faint sour tang of damp wood. Every creak and groan reminds you that this structure is temporary, barely standing, yet it shelters you from the icy gale. The floor crunches under your boots, a scattering of sawdust and frozen mud. Straw lies in the corners, stuffed into gaps to block the cold. You run your hand along the wall and feel the tar paper, brittle and waxy under your fingers, almost peeling away in strips. The wind outside pushes hard, rattling the shack, but the boards hold for now. Inside, life presses close. Men sit shoulder to shoulder on rough benches, their breath steaming in the air. Someone plays a fiddle, the tune scratchy but spirited, echoing oddly in the cramped space. A pot of beans bubbles over a small iron stove, its lid rattling with every gust. The smell fills the shack, earthy and comforting, though smoke lingers low, making your eyes sting. You imagine the clamour of voices. Workers swap stories, boasting about how many ties they've laid, or cursing the foreman in low growls. Laughter rises, followed by a hacking cough, the sound of someone pouring coffee into a dented tin cup. Children scurry between legs, their laughter bright, though they too shiver under patched coats. The noise is constant, alive, the very opposite of the muffled silence you left in the dugout. Yet danger lives in these walls. Fires break out easily when stoves tip or lanterns spill. Illness spreads quickly in the crowded air, and when the wind turns fierce, whole shacks have been known to collapse, their flimsy boards giving way under snow. Still, workers rebuild, nailing boards back together, hammering tar paper flat, because trains must keep running and people must keep warm. Outside, the scene is just as vivid. Rows of shanties lean against one another, roofs patched with whatever was at hand, tin sheets, blankets, even canvas painted with tar. Smoke rises in uneven plumes. The air carries the constant clang of hammers, the whistle of distant trains, the crunch of boots in snow. Dogs bark, horses whinny, children shout, all blending into a ragged symphony of survival. At night, the whole settlement seems to glow faintly, lantern light leaking from cracks and flapping seams. From a distance, it might look fragile, pitiful. But step inside, and you feel the fierce determination. These walls, however crude, hold the night at bay. Your senses soak in every detail. The bitter tang of smoke clinging to your clothes. The constant draft sneaking through cracks, brushing your cheeks like icy fingers. The warmth of bodies pressed close, each breath adding to the small cloud of shared heat. The rattle of the shack in the wind, at once frightening and reassuring. You are reminded that survival is not always elegant. It is often noisy, crowded, patched together with whatever scraps lie nearest. Tomorrow, some of these men will leave, moving further down the line. New shacks will rise, just as crude, just as fragile. This town may vanish, its boards scattered, its tar paper burned or buried in snow. But tonight, you sit inside one, quilt pulled around your shoulders, lanterns swaying above, listening to the fiddle and the wind. The shanty town embodies both the hardship and the strange warmth of community. Alone, the cold might kill you. Together, even in flimsy walls, you endure. And as your eyes drift shut, rocked gently by the rattle of boards, you understand that sometimes survival is less about what you build and more about who you build beside. The clamour of the shanty town fades from your ears, replaced by the steady cadence of boots on packed snow and the crisp snap of a flag in the wind. You've reached a frontier fort, its silhouette stark against the pale horizon. Square walls of timber rise high, watchtowers jutting from the corners, gates creaking as they open to admit you. Unlike the soddy or the dugout, this place was built with intent not just to shelter a family, but to guard whole groups through the winter. It is well established in military records that forts dotted the western frontier, serving both as defensive outposts and community centres. Their structures were more durable than the scattered cabins of homesteaders, often combining timber palisades with stone foundations. Within their walls stood barracks, storehouses, blacksmith shops, and sometimes even chapels. For soldiers stationed there, winter survival depended not on improvisation but on discipline, design, and sheer numbers. A curious tidbit emerges from journals of enlisted men. Many forts had walls chinked not only with clay but with horsehair and ashes, a strange mixture thought to keep drafts from seeping through. The men joked that the horses stood guard twice, once in life, and again in the very walls themselves. Imagine pressing your hand against a timber log, knowing strands of mane and tail were woven into the mud sealing its cracks. Scholars still discuss whether these forts offered real comfort compared to civilian cabins. On one hand, soldiers had routine rations, regulated firewood supplies, and communal stoves. On the other, barracks were crowded, air was often thick with smoke, and disease spread quickly in the close quarters. Was the fort a fortress of security, or merely a wooden prison against the cold? The debate continues among historians, each diary giving its own perspective. Step inside the barracks in your imagination. Rows of bunks stretch down the length of the room, straw mattresses stuffed into rough wooden frames. The smell is heavy smoke, sweat, damp wool, and boiled coffee. Boots line the wall, crusted with snow, while coats hang in uneven rows. At one end, a stove glows faintly, its iron surface radiating heat that barely reaches the furthest bunks. You sit on the edge of a straw mattress, quilt drawn around your shoulders, and hear the low murmur of men talking, coughing, snoring. The air is thick, almost oppressive, yet it is warmer than the outside. You run your hand along the wall and feel the rough grain of logs, sticky with resin in some spots, slick with frost in others. The chinking holds, but drafts slip through, making the lantern flames waver. Every sound amplifies, the crackle of fire, the scrape of boots on the floor, the clink of tin mugs. In the stillness between, you hear the wind pressing against the fort walls, trying in vain to claw its way in. The fort is more than shelter, it is order. Guards pace along the walls, their footsteps echoing above. Drums beat faintly at dawn, calling men to duty. Even in the depths of winter, routines are kept. Drills in the snow, repairs to palisades, watch rotations through icy nights. You imagine standing atop the wall, snowflakes stinging your cheeks as you scan the empty plain. The horizon stretches white and endless, but inside the fort, structure holds chaos at bay. Meals are communal, eaten in long mess halls where smoke gathers near the ceiling beams. The taste of salted pork, beans, and hardtack fills your mouth, bland yet sustaining. Coffee boils constantly, its bitter scent clinging to every corner. Men trade stories between mouthfuls, their voices echoing in the wooden chamber. Sometimes laughter erupts, sometimes silence settles heavy, but always the fire burns, and always the food comes on time. That reliability feels like a luxury in this land of improvisation. At night, the fort grows quieter. The gates creak closed, torches flicker, and the world outside seems to vanish. In your bunk, you hear the muffled howl of wolves, distant and eerie, but it does not pierce the fort's defences. You pull the quilt tighter, the straw crunching beneath you, and close your eyes with a rare sense of safety. Whatever else the fort may lack, it offers protection, and that alone lets you rest. Yet the fort also carries an undertone of unease. Illness thrives here in winter. The air grows stale, coughs spread like wildfire. The close quarters that bring warmth also breed fevers. You imagine lying awake, listening to the laboured breathing of your neighbour, wondering if you will fall ill by morning. Survival here is not only about cold, but about the invisible threats that linger in shared air. The texture of fort life seeps into your senses. The feel of rough wool blankets scratching your skin. The sound of boots stomping snow off at the door. The sight of frost creeping across the inside of window panes delicate as lace. The smell of tallow candles burning low, mingled with wood smoke. It is both claustrophobic and strangely comforting, a paradox that defines every winter behind the palisade. Still, there is camaraderie here that softer homes cannot replicate. Men sing quietly in the evenings, their voices blending with the crackle of stoves. A fiddler plays a tune, boughs scratching against strings, and boots tap along in rhythm. You picture yourself leaning back, eyes half closed, lulled by the hum of voices and the warmth of company. The fort may be harsh, but it holds life within its walls, and that life is enough to make winter survivable. When spring finally comes, the snow melts from the palisades, the gates swing wider, and the fort breathes easier. But for now, in the dead of winter, you lie wrapped in the disciplined comfort of barracks, knowing the walls stand strong, the fires burn steady, and the routine carries you forward one day at a time. You close your eyes. The drums are silent, the guards pace above, the stove hums faintly. Beyond the walls, the cold rages on, but here, within timber and stone, you are cocooned in the order of survival. The sound of drums and the order of the fort fade, and you find yourself walking along a narrow river, your breath hanging white in the air. Here, the wilderness feels more solitary again. No barracks. No barracks sergeant shouting orders. Instead, a single trail of footprints winds into the trees. You follow, and soon a small cabin comes into view, smoke curling lazily from its chimney, pelts hanging stiff from a rack. You've stumbled upon the dwelling of a fur trapper. Most accounts from the fur trade era agree that trappers and traders often built modest one-room cabins in remote places where they could live through winters. These cabins were never grand, just 4 walls of logs, a roof steep enough to shed snow, and always a hearth or stove in the center. What set them apart were the furs themselves, stacked against walls or spread across the floor. Those pelts weren't just wealth, they doubled as insulation, turning drafty spaces into warmer dens. A curious little detail appears in some trapper journals. They often used bear or wolf pelts as doors in place of wood. A heavy skin hung over the opening, weighted with stones or nails, kept out snow and wind surprisingly well. Imagine ducking through a doorway and brushing past a wolf's fur, still bristly with the memory of the hunt. It may feel eerie, but it was practical. There is still debate among historians about whether trappers' cabins were comfortable havens or lonely prisons. Some emphasize their snug warmth, filled with pelts and provisions, a perfect refuge against winter. Others highlight the dampness, the smoke-filled air, and the crushing solitude. Did trappers thrive in independence or suffer in isolation? The surviving diaries leave room for both interpretations. Step inside one of these cabins in your imagination. The first sensation is smell thick, musky, almost overwhelming. Furs hang from rafters, each carrying the scent of the animal it once was. The air is smoky from a small iron stove, its glow casting flickers of light across the walls. The floor is rough, scattered with straw and scraps of hide. You run your hand over a pelt soft, warm, thick as a quilt, and realize that in this world, animals became both currency and comfort. The trapper himself moves with deliberate slowness, tending to the stove, mending a net, or scraping a hide. His boots are cracked, his beard frosted with ice. He hums low, a sound almost lost beneath the crackle of fire. The room is cluttered, traps leaning in a corner, rifles propped by the door, sacks of dried beans stacked against the wall. Every item has its place, every object a purpose. You sit down on a rough bench, quilt draped over your shoulders. The stove radiates warmth, but it doesn't reach far. The furs hanging nearby serve as insulation, muting drafts and muffling outside sounds. Your fingertips trail across the log wall, rough and sticky with resin, then over a raccoon pelt, smooth and plush. You feel the difference instantly. The wood cold, the fur alive with stored heat. At night, the cabin closes in further. The stove's glow shrinks, embers winking low. Shadows thicken, stretching long and strange across the fur-lined walls. Outside, the howl of wolves rises, eerie and close. Inside, you hear only the steady breathing of the trapper as he sleeps on a pile of hides, wrapped in blankets that smell of leather and musk. The silence is heavy, broken only by the occasional snap of a log in the stove. Daily life here was simple, repetitive, yet demanding. Each morning the trapper would stomp into the snow, boots crunching as he checked lines of traps along the river. By midday he returned, arms laden with frozen pelts, his face raw from the wind. He thawed them by the fire, stretched them on frames, scraped them clean and stacked them in neat piles. The rhythm was endless: trap, skin, dry, patch, repeat. The cabin was both workshop and home, its air thick with the mingled scents of smoke, fur, and sweat. You imagine how time passed in such solitude. Some trappers carved notches in beams to mark the days, their knives scratching slow progress into the wood. Others talked aloud to themselves, their voices echoing in the small space. Still others filled the silence with music fiddles or flutes carved from bone. The cabin, for all its warmth, was a place where the mind wandered freely, sometimes too freely. Visitors often wrote of these cabins with awe. To stumble upon one after days in the wilderness was like discovering a miracle: smoke rising, warmth radiating, a man inside who greeted you with rough kindness and a mug of strong coffee. Yet they also spoke of the strange weight of the place, the air so heavy with pelts, the silence so deep, the isolation so profound. You settle deeper into the bench, feeling the quiet press against you. The firelight glows softly, illuminating the curve of antlers mounted on the wall, the glint of steel traps stacked neatly. The sense of safety is mixed with unease. This is not a homestead with laughter, not a fort with drums, but a solitary refuge where one man fights winter alone. The sensory details wrap around you: the crack of ice melting in a pot on the stove, the rough touch of fur under your palm, the smoky tang in the back of your throat, the faint draft sneaking in around the door flap of hide. Each small discomfort makes the warmth more precious, each flicker of light more sacred. As you close your eyes, you imagine the life of the trapper: days spent in snow, nights in smoke, years measured by pelts hung and sold. The cabin is both haven and cage, but without it, winter would devour him. And in this moment, nestled among furs, quilt drawn tight, you too feel the strange comfort of a world reduced to its simplest form: fire, hide, and the will to endure. The trapper's lonely cabin fades from your thoughts as you step into another kind of dwelling, one where the air inside feels alive with smoke that doesn't always know where to go. You've entered a place where the heart of survival lies in one small but stubborn invention: the chimney. A cabin without one is just a smoky box. With one, it becomes a real home. But on the frontier, chimneys were anything but perfect. Contemporary records make it clear that every pioneer family wrestled with this problem. To have warmth, you needed fire. To have fire, you needed a way to let smoke escape without letting the heat go with it. Some families built chimneys of stone, others of clay and sticks plastered together, and some made crude flues from mud and sod. None of them worked flawlessly. The difference between a snug evening and a house filled with choking smoke often came down to how clever or lucky the builder was. One odd note that drifts from homesteaders' memoirs is that some settlers stuffed bottles or jars into their chimney walls. When heated, the glass would supposedly absorb and radiate warmth back into the room. It was a strange experiment, not always successful, but you can imagine the glow of firelight catching in those glassy orbs, turning a drafty chimney into a kind of primitive lantern. Experts remain divided about whether early chimneys helped more than they hurt. Some accounts praise them as life-saving inventions that drew smoke efficiently upward, keeping rooms clear and breathable. Others argue that many simply belched soot back inside, leaving families coughing, their walls blackened, their quilts permeated with the stench of ash. Even now, historians can't quite agree. Were these chimneys triumphs of frontier ingenuity, or half-baked compromises. Picture yourself kneeling before a hearth, watching smoke curl upward. At first it rises steadily, disappearing into the chimney. Relief washes over you, you can breathe, your eyes don't sting, the air feels clean. But then a gust of wind rattles the walls, and suddenly the smoke billows back down, filling the room in a choking grey haze. You cough, wave your hand, tears streaking your cheeks, and scramble to adjust the damper. Life inside depends not just on fire but on mastering this delicate balance. The sensory world is rich and intense. The walls smell of soot, sticky to the touch. The air tastes bitter, ash clinging to your tongue. Your ears catch the hollow roar of wind through the chimney, like a distant howl echoing in the flue. And always the fire crackles, stubbornly, almost mockingly, reminding you that warmth comes at a cost. Families tried endless tricks. Some built chimneys wide enough to stand inside, thinking the sheer size would tame the smoke. Others narrowed them until flames sputtered, nearly suffocated. A few plastered them with mud every season, knowing that cracks meant sparks, and sparks meant disaster. And always there was the constant chore of sweeping soot, climbing precariously onto icy roofs with brushes or branches to keep flues clear. You can imagine the frustration. Picture yourself waking in the night to find smoke pooling thick above your head, eyes burning, lungs aching. You scramble to open a shutter, icy wind blasting in as the smoke escapes. The cold seeps in with it, undoing hours of careful fire tending. You lie back down, quilt pulled to your chin, muttering that tomorrow you'll patch the flue again, but tomorrow will bring the same struggle. And yet, when the chimney worked, the difference was miraculous. The room glowed warmly, the air felt breathable, and for once you could sit by the fire without coughing. Meals cooked evenly, light shone bright, and conversation lingered longer into the night. The chimney became not just an escape for smoke, but a symbol of progress, proof that your home was more than a hut, it was civilized, even in the wilderness. The rhythm of life revolved around it. Children gathered close, reading by firelight while the chimney hummed softly above. Mothers hung kettles from iron cranes, stirring stews that bubbled rich with beans and salted pork. Fathers leaned back in rough chairs, sighing as the warmth sank deep into weary bones. Outside, the wind screamed. Inside, the chimney carried it away, replacing chaos with a calm hum of survival. Of course, danger never vanished. Sparks leapt from chimneys, igniting sod roofs or brush piled too close. Whole cabins went up in flames because of one ember carried skyward. You imagine lying in bed, hearing a sudden crackle above, realizing the roof has caught. Panic erupts, buckets of snow hurled upward, shouts piercing the night. Even salvation carried risk. Still, you think of the sound that soothed more than any quilt, the steady draft of a chimney pulling smoke upward, leaving the hearth to glow pure and steady. It was a frontier lullaby, a reminder that human hands could coax order from chaos. The chimney was imperfect, fragile, but it was a fragile miracle. You close your eyes now, hearing the faint whistle of wind up the flue, feeling warmth seep across your skin. The air smells faintly of pine smoke and singed wool, but it is breathable, almost sweet compared to the choking haze you endured before. You let your body relax, trusting in the draft above, and sink into the rhythm of fire and chimney. Outside, the night howls mercilessly. Inside, you breathe easy at last. The smoky breath of the chimney drifts from memory, and you step into another kind of shelter where warmth doesn't just come from fire, it comes from people pressed close together. Ahead of you rises a long, plain building, its roof sagging slightly under snow, lantern light glowing faintly through slits in the wood. As you push open the door, a wave of warmth hits you not from the stove in the corner, but from the sheer body heat of dozens living under one roof. You've found yourself in a frontier bunkhouse. It is well known from records of mining towns, ranches, and frontier settlements that bunkhouses were common in the late 19th century. They were large communal shelters, often built quickly from whatever timber was available, designed to house men working far from home. Inside, rows of bunks or hammocks lined the walls, and every inch of space was used. These structures were not luxurious, but they allowed workers to share heat and resources in the depths of winter. A curious detail that shows up in old ranch accounts is that bunkhouses sometimes had straw packed directly between the inner and outer walls, a primitive insulation. When it decayed, mice ran riot, scratching and squeaking in the night. Imagine trying to fall asleep while dozens of men snored, coughed, and muttered, and in between their noises, you heard the scurry of small paws in the walls. It was crowded life layered with tiny irritations. There is still disagreement among historians about whether bunkhouses fostered camaraderie or bred resentment. Some accounts celebrate them as lively, filled with laughter, songs, and the warmth of friendship. Others describe them as grim, filthy, and tense, where quarrels sparked easily in cramped quarters. The truth likely wavered, shifting with the men, the work, and the weather. Step inside with your imagination now. The air is thick, heavy with smoke, sweat, and the sour tang of damp wool. Lanterns swing faintly from the rafters, their light dim and smoky. Rows of bunks line both sides of the hall, some with quilts hanging down for privacy, others bare. The floorboards creak beneath boots, and the sound of voices hums in the background like a restless tide. You find a place on a bunk, its straw mattress rustling beneath you. The quilt is patched, rough against your skin, but the heat in the room makes it almost unnecessary. You can feel the presence of others all around, the weight of bodies shifting, the rhythm of breath, the occasional cough breaking the steady drone. Even without the stove, this many people together create a cocoon of warmth, uncomfortable yet life-saving. The sensory experience is overwhelming. The smell of tobacco smoke lingers in the air, mingling with sweat and damp wool. The sound of boots thudding as men return from work echoes through the space. A fiddle strikes up in the corner, the tune scratchy but cheerful, accompanied by low voices humming along. Someone laughs, someone swears softly, someone sings a line of a song from home. The bunkhouse is noisy, alive, a patchwork of survival stitched from dozens of beating hearts. Meals are eaten together at rough tables in the same hall. Tin cups clatter, spoons scrape against bowls. Voices rise in argument and laughter. The taste is simple: beans, bread, salted pork, but shared food feels richer, warmer. You can almost hear the scrape of chairs and the murmur of stories told between bites, men recalling distant families or joking about the day's work. At night, the bunkhouse does not grow silent. It changes pitch. Snoring begins, loud and uneven. Someone whispers a prayer. Another shifts restlessly, straw crunching beneath them. Rats scurry in the shadows, emboldened by the crumbs left on the floor. The air grows warmer still, heavy with the press of bodies. You lie back on your bunk, staring at the ceiling beams, hearing the symphony of men sleeping, and realize that solitude is impossible here. And yet, there is comfort. If the roof creaks under snow, you're not alone. If wolves howl outside, there are dozens of others listening too. If fire sparks in the stove, half a dozen leap up to smother it. The bunkhouse, crowded and flawed, is also protective, a collective shield against the wilderness. You imagine winter storms here, snow piling against the walls, wind shrieking through cracks, the stove blazing as men crowd close, singing louder to drown out the gale. The walls may shake, but inside, voices rise in stubborn defiance. You close your eyes and picture yourself humming along, quilt pulled up, the warmth of bodies making the cold a distant thought. The sensory details lull you further. The scratch of wool on your cheek, the faint glow of lantern light flickering through quilts, the rhythmic rise and fall of breath around you, like a tide that carries you gently towards sleep. You feel the weight of survival spread thin across many shoulders, each man carrying a piece, none of them alone. Tomorrow will bring quarrels, noise, chores, the endless grind of work. But tonight, the bunkhouse shelters you with heat drawn not only from fire but from humanity itself. You sigh, let the sounds fade into background music, and drift, knowing that in this noisy, crowded refuge, you are safe from the cold gnawing just beyond the walls. The bunkhouse noise lingers in your ears, boots, fiddles, coughs, until slowly the sound changes. Now you hear the faint creak of poles shifting in the wind, the soft flap of canvas, and the low hum of fire crackling in the center of a circle. You look up and see a conical silhouette against the snow, tall and elegant, smoke drifting smoothly through a flap at its peak. You have stepped into a teepee, a shelter refined over centuries by indigenous peoples of the plains, and admired by many who came west. It is widely recognized that the teepee was one of the most efficient portable dwellings in harsh climates, built of long poles arranged in a cone, covered with buffalo hides or later canvas. The teepee could be dismantled quickly and moved with the herd. Its shape shed snow and rain, its flap system allowed ventilation, and its design directed smoke upward through the opening. Where settlers often struggled with smoky cabins or collapsing roofs, teepees had already solved those problems with remarkable grace. An unusual but well-attested note in travelers' journals describes how some plains families painted their teepees with symbolic designs, lightning bolts, suns, animal spirits that not only told stories, but were believed to protect the inhabitants. Imagine lying inside on a winter night, looking up at a buffalo painted above your head, feeling its watchful presence guarding you from the storm. Researchers continue to discuss how much settlers adopted or adapted the teepee design. Some accounts suggest pioneers borrowed ideas, experimenting with conical shelters of their own when caught in snowstorms. Others believe most settlers admired teepees but lacked the skill or materials to reproduce them effectively. The question remains unsettled, but what no one denies is that many observed teepees with awe, admitting their superiority to canvas tents and flimsy cabins in winter. Step inside one with your imagination now. The first thing you notice is space. The teepee feels tall, airy, unlike the low dugout or the cramped bunkhouse. Light from the fire rises upward, illuminating hides stitched carefully together, glowing warm and golden. Smoke curls in graceful spirals toward the opening at the top, slipping out into the cold night. The air inside is warmer than you expect, the heat distributed evenly by the draft. The sensory details surround you. The hides smell faintly of musk and smoke, rich and earthy. The floor is covered in furs, soft beneath your boots, muffling steps. A low murmur of voices fills the air, family members talking, children whispering, laughter mingling with the fire's crackle. Every sound feels close yet gentle, softened by the curved walls. You kneel near the fire. Its glow warms your face, while your back stays comfortable thanks to the insulating hides. A pot hangs above the flames, steam rising fragrant with herbs and meat. You taste the air, savory and smoky, and realize how central food and fire are in this space. They are the heart around which everything else revolves. At night, the teepee becomes almost magical. Flames flicker against painted designs, making them seem to move horses galloping, eagles circling, lightning flashing. The wind outside howls, but the conical walls deflect it, creaking softly yet holding firm. You curl beneath a quilt or fur, listening to the rhythm of breath around you, and feel not only sheltered but part of a rhythm older than the frontier itself. Of course, teepees were not without their challenges. In extreme cold, the hides could stiffen, making them harder to adjust. Snow sometimes drifted inside around the base, and moving them required effort, especially in blizzards. Yet compared to canvas tents or sod houses, their balance of portability, insulation, and ventilation was unmatched. Settlers often marveled that indigenous families could strike camp, travel miles, and re-establish shelter in a single day, something most homesteaders could never dream of. Imagine the daily rituals inside: women tending fires, children playing with carved toys on fur mats, elders telling stories while the flames danced across their faces. songs rising, echoing faintly in the cone. The teepee was more than shelter. It was a cultural center, a space infused with meaning, memory, and continuity. For a moment, you picture yourself lying back, staring upward. The poles converge above you like ribs of a great creature, the night sky faintly visible through the smoke hole. Snowflakes drift down now and then, melting as they touch the warm air. You feel as though you are both inside and outside, both protected and still part of the wider world. It is a balance few other shelters offer. Visitors sometimes describe teepees as miraculous in winter, astonished at how warm they felt compared to the log cabins they knew. One even wrote that, "The storm outside is forgotten once you sit within, as if the world has kindly withdrawn its teeth." You can sense the truth of that now. The storm raging beyond seems far away, almost unreal, while inside, warmth and companionship hold sway. The tipi reminds you that survival was not only about improvisation, but about knowledge honed over generations. Its design, perfected long before settlers arrived, proved what experience could teach, that the land, even when cruel, could be lived with rather than fought. Settlers often saw themselves as battling nature. The teepee showed another path, working with the elements, not against them. You breathe deeply, soothed by the warmth, the rhythm of voices, the whisper of hides shifting softly in the wind. Your eyelids grow heavy as the fire glows steady, shadows ripple, and the wind outside loses its power to frighten. Wrapped in fur, you let yourself drift, knowing that this conical shelter has carried countless families through countless winters, and tonight, in your imagination, it carries you too. The tipi's painted hides fade behind your eyelids, and when you open them again, you're standing at the edge of a rough settlement. Lanterns glow faintly through frosted windows, and the air hums with the sound of muffled voices, clinking bottles, and the occasional creak of a wagon outside. You've reached a trading post, one of those crucial frontier hubs where supplies, gossip, and survival converged. Behind its timber walls, merchants and travelers alike found not only goods but shelter from the winter's cruelty. It is commonly understood that trading posts doubled as lifelines across the Wild West. More than stores, they were social centers and sanctuaries. Their construction was usually sturdier than the shanties or sod houses around them, for merchants had both incentive and resources to reinforce walls against storms. Logs were stacked thick, gaps stuffed with mud or rags, sometimes even layers of hides nailed on the inside for extra insulation. People didn't just shop there, they slept, ate, and huddled against the wind in its dimly lit corners. One peculiar practice appears in merchant accounts. Some owners tacked entire flattened barrels against their walls, creating both storage and insulation. From outside, it gave the building an odd armored look, but inside, the extra layers of wood and air trapped heat. Imagine running your hand along such a wall, feeling the bulge of a barrel stave while warmth from the stove lingered in the gaps. A strange sight, but effective enough to keep frost from biting through. There is ongoing discussion among historians about whether trading posts were genuinely hospitable refuges or primarily commercial traps. Some argue they offered genuine safety, hot meals, and fair trade to weary travelers. Others claim many exploited desperate settlers, charging high prices for basics and offering only cramped, smoky quarters in return. The truth, as usual, is a blend of both kindness and exploitation mingled like smoke in the rafters. Step through the door in your imagination. The warmth hits first, followed by the thick smell of tobacco, leather, and pine smoke. Lanterns hang from beams, their yellow glow reflecting off shelves lined with tins of coffee, sacks of flour, jars of molasses. The wooden floor is worn smooth by boots, creaking beneath your step. You brush snow from your coat and look around, feeling both relief and claustrophobia as you realize how many others have crowded into this space. The stove in the center glows red, radiating comfort. Around it, travelers cluster, boots stretched out, hands open to the heat. You hear their voices, low conversations about cattle drives, whispers of gold strikes, muttered prayers for spring. The sound is a tapestry of accents, each voice carrying stories from 100 miles of wilderness. Someone coughs, someone laughs, someone strums a battered guitar. The trading post breathes like a living thing, pulsing with human survival. The sensory details wrap around you. The scent of leather harnesses stacked in a corner mingles with the sweet tang of molasses leaking from a cracked jar. You taste smoke in the air, faint and bitter, clinging to your tongue. Your fingertips trace the grain of the counter, sticky with spilled syrup. The floor is gritty under your boots, dust mixed with snow, packed down by countless footsteps. Every corner hums with life, even as the wind shrieks outside. Travelers often slept in these posts, sprawled on benches, or rolling out blankets on the floor after merchants closed shop for the night. You picture yourself lying on the planks, quilt wrapped tight, staring up at rafters hung with saddles, lanterns swaying gently. The warmth of the stove spreads unevenly, and you inch closer, your cheeks glowing hot while your toes remain cold. Around you, strangers breathe heavily, some snoring, some whispering in dreams. It is not private, not comfortable, but it is alive, and that feels like luxury when the prairie howls. The walls themselves tell stories. In the dim light, you see carvings etched into beams, initials, dates, crude drawings of wagons and horses. Travelers marked their presence, leaving scratches like footprints in wood. You run your hand over one, the grooves deep, and wonder who carved it and whether they survived that winter. Each mark is a reminder that countless others stood where you stand now, clinging to the same fragile hope that warmth would outlast the storm. Yet the trading post was not without hardship. Supplies ran short, tempers flared, prices soared. Imagine needing flour and finding the last sack sold, watching another family clutch it with relief while your children go hungry. The room's warmth could feel cruel then, mocking you as you worried over dwindling resources. And still, you stayed, because leaving meant snow, wind, and death. But for all its flaws, the post was a meeting ground. You picture a night when a storm raged so fiercely no one dared leave. Families, trappers, soldiers, ranchers, all trapped together in the same room. Voices rose in song, hands clapped in rhythm, stories unfurled like quilts stitched with memory. The post became less a store than a communal hearth, the walls lined not with goods but with shared survival. You lean back against a barrel now, feeling its curved wood press your spine. The stove's glow flickers on faces around you, tired, soot-stained, but alive. Your eyes grow heavy, lulled by the hum of voices and the constant crackle of fire. The wind hammers the walls, but they hold, padded with barrels, hides, and determination. For tonight, you are safe inside the heartbeat of the frontier. The warmth of the trading post drifts away, and soon you hear a different sound, a metallic clang echoing down a narrow valley, followed by the hollow thud of shovels striking frozen earth. Lanterns flicker in the darkness, illuminating crude shacks scattered along a hillside scarred by pickaxes. You've stepped into a mining camp, where men dig into rock by day and crowd into hastily built hovels by night, clinging to warmth as fiercely as to dreams of gold or silver. What is well recorded in frontier reports is that mining camps sprang up almost overnight, especially in places like Colorado, Nevada, and Montana. Thousands of men rushed into the mountains, building shelters from whatever scraps they could find, rough timber cut from nearby slopes, sheets of tin hammered together, or canvas patched with tar. These were not meant to last, but when winter hit, the flimsy shacks became the only line between miners and freezing death. One odd little note appears in memoirs of prospectors. Miners sometimes insulated their cabins with gunny sacks filled with sawdust. They nailed the sacks to walls or stacked them along the edges of rooms, turning refuse into insulation. It made for lumpy, unsightly interiors, but it kept the chill away better than bare boards. Imagine leaning against a wall and feeling the crunch of sawdust shifting behind coarse burlap, a strange but comforting texture. Researchers remain divided about whether mining camp housing was truly survivable or merely tolerable. Some argue these shacks, clustered close together, trapped enough warmth to see men through bitter nights. Others describe them as death traps, drafty, smoky, crawling with vermin, where pneumonia and fire claimed more lives than mining accidents. The evidence is mixed, and perhaps the truth depends on whose shack you stepped into. Picture yourself walking into one now. The door groans on rusty hinges, and you duck your head to enter. The air inside is dense with smoke from a battered stove that groans as it works, patched with wire and soot-stained clay. Tin plates and mugs clutter a rough plank table. Straw lies in heaps on the floor, serving as bedding for half a dozen men who share the space. You wrinkle your nose at the sour mix of sweat, smoke, and damp wool that clings to the air. The walls are a patchwork, rough boards nailed side by side, gaps stuffed with rags, gunny sacks, even newspapers pasted with flour paste. Your hand runs along one seam where the paper headline still shows faintly. News of a distant election, now turned into insulation. Snow presses hard outside, but here the walls hold, thin but stubborn. Voices fill the shack. Men argue over claims, boasting of veins of silver, cursing bad luck. Laughter bursts, followed by hacking coughs. Someone plucks at a banjo, its strings twanging off-key, but the music lifts the mood. The stove crackles, spitting sparks that dance across the tin plate beneath. Each sound competes with the wind's moan seeping faintly through the seams, reminding everyone just how fragile this shelter is. The sensory details deepen. The stove radiates heat unevenly, roasting your face while your back stays cold. The straw mattress under you prickles your skin, and mice dart across it boldly, searching for crumbs. You taste the bitterness of coffee boiled too long, strong enough to make your teeth ache. Your eyes sting from smoke curling thick and low, forcing you to squint as you look around. At night, the shack becomes a chorus. Snoring rises, loud and jagged. Someone mumbles in a dream. Another coughs endlessly, the sound heavy with sickness. You pull your quilt close, nose buried for warmth, listening to the restless music of survival. The floor creaks as someone shifts, boots thudding softly. Outside, wolves prowl near the camp, their howls echoing in the narrow valley, but the noise inside drowns them out. Despite the misery, there is a peculiar sense of camaraderie here. Men share blankets, food, even jokes, knowing that together they have a better chance. One diary recalls a group of miners taking turns through the night to keep the fire alive, each man rising in his hour to feed the stove. Alone, the cold would have won. Together, they cheated it just enough. You imagine a storm night. Snow piles high against the shack, rattling its tin roof like a drum. The stove blazes, glowing red, and men crowd closer, their boots pressed nearly against it. Someone tells a tall tale of striking gold as wide as a river. Laughter roars, mugs clink, and for a brief time the storm is forgotten. The walls might be thin, the roof patched, but in this circle of warmth and noise, survival feels possible. Still, the dangers never fade. Sparks leap from the stove, and everyone knows one ember could ignite the shack, devouring it in minutes. Illness spreads, and a single cough could turn deadly in such close air. Yet night after night, the shacks endure, patched again and again, testimony to the stubborn will of those who chose to dig for dreams in frozen ground. You lean back now, quilt tight, listening to the stove hum and the banjo twang faintly. Your body relaxes despite the noise and the smells, because you sense what these men must have felt, the knowledge that while flimsy, smoky, and crowded, this shack is still enough. Enough to make it through the night, enough to wake in the morning and dig again, enough to see winter bend slowly towards spring. Your eyes grow heavy, the banjo fades, the laughter softens, the stove whispers steady heat. Outside, the wind rattles the tin, but inside, you are cocooned in the rough determination of a mining camp. You drift, knowing that sometimes survival comes not from fine walls but from patched planks, stubborn hands, and the unshakable belief that tomorrow might bring gold. The racket of the mining camp recedes, and the air grows quieter. Snow falls heavily now, blanketing the prairie in white silence. In the distance, you see the faint shape of a homestead, a single roof rising from the endless flat. Smoke drifts weakly from its chimney. You trudge closer, boots sinking deep, and soon you're standing at the door of a house that looks as if it's barely holding together. Planks uneven, shutters loose, rags stuffed into cracks. This is not a miner's shack or a trapper's hut. This is the first hard winter of a family's homestead. It is widely acknowledged in pioneer letters and memoirs that the first winters were the hardest. Families often arrived late in the year, rushing to raise some form of house before the snow fell. These homes were usually incomplete, walls not yet sealed, roofs thin, chimneys draughty. The settlers had land but not yet security, and they fought the season with little more than quilts and determination. One curious detail turns up often in these accounts. Families patched gaps in their walls with whatever scraps they had: old clothing, blankets, even stuffed newspapers. One woman described sewing together strips of canvas from a wagon cover and nailing them across gaps. Another admitted to stuffing rags into cracks so tightly that her children joked their old shirts had become part of the house. Survival demanded resourcefulness down to the last scrap of fabric. Historians are still divided over whether these hardships were exaggerated later to highlight pioneer grit, or whether conditions truly were as dire as the diaries suggest. Some believe families wrote dramatic tales to underscore their eventual triumphs. Others argue the evidence of frostbitten feet, starved cattle, and abandoned claims proves the accounts were no exaggeration at all. The question lingers, a shadow over every story of survival. Step inside this rough homestead now in your imagination. The air is cold, even with a fire burning weakly in the hearth. The walls are thin, boards mismatched, and you can see your own breath as you move. Quilts hang from nails, serving as both blankets and wall coverings. Rags bulge from gaps where icy air sneaks through. The floor is rough earth, stamped flat, scattered with straw to soften the cold. You sit on a bench near the fire. The smell is a mixture of smoke, damp wool, and earth. Your fingers run along the wall, feeling the ridges of wood and the coarse patches of cloth stuffed between. The fire crackles but does not roar. Wood is scarce, and each log is burned carefully. The warmth barely reaches your toes. You curl them tight in worn boots, trying to capture the heat before it fades. Life here is stripped to essentials. The family moves slowly, bundled in coats even indoors. Children huddle beneath quilts by the fire, their cheeks flushed red. A kettle simmers faintly, its contents little more than beans and water, but the steam fills the room with comfort. The mother stitches quietly, mending a worn sleeve, while the father tends the draughty chimney again, muttering under his breath about leaks. Every hour is a struggle, every moment spent fighting the cold's relentless press. The sounds are subdued. Wind rattles shutters, moaning through cracks. Quilts rustle as children shift, whispering to one another in drowsy voices. The fire pops, sending tiny sparks upward. You hear the faint crunch of snow slipping from the roof, the creak of timbers under frost. It is a house alive with little noises, each one reminding you how fragile the structure truly is. And yet, there is resilience here. Families made do, finding ways to endure. Quilts doubled as doors, barrels were cut to line walls, straw was scattered thick beneath beds. Some even brought livestock inside at night, the warmth of cows or goats raising the temperature enough to keep frost from killing. Imagine lying in bed with a cow shifting in the corner, its breath steaming into the air. It was odd, cramped, but it worked. Neighbors, too, played a role. In some accounts, families shared what they had: an extra quilt, a few logs of wood, a sack of flour. The sense of community, even among scattered homesteads, meant survival could be shared. Picture a knock at the door in the middle of a storm, a neighbor staggering in with windburned cheeks, collapsing by the fire with grateful sighs. The house, draughty as it was, became a beacon in the frozen dark. You can imagine the feelings of the first winter fear, exhaustion, determination. Each day began with chores that never ended: chopping wood, patching cracks, cooking meager meals, drying boots by the fire. Each night ended with prayers for warmth, whispered in the dim glow of embers. The cold was not just outside. It pressed against every seam, reminding the family constantly of how thin the line between survival and failure truly was. The sensory world wraps tightly around you, the scratch of wool against your skin, the rough straw poking through quilts stuffed with rags, the taste of thin bean stew, warm but bland, clinging to your tongue, the smell of damp earth, never entirely masked by smoke, and through it all, the sound of your own breath, loud in the cold stillness. Yet even in hardship, there were small joys: a story told by firelight, a hymn sung softly in the night, a child's laughter at a joke whispered under blankets. These fragile moments were as much insulation as the quilts, wrapping hearts in warmth even when the body shivered. You sit back, quilt drawn tight, feeling the draft slip through another crack. Your eyelids grow heavy, but you keep listening to the fire's faint sigh, the wind's low howl, the steady breathing of those beside you. The house may be draughty, patched and thin, but it is still a house. It stands, and so do you. And with each passing night, spring draws closer, carrying the promise that one day this rough shelter will be rebuilt, stronger, steadier, warmer. For now, in the deep hush of winter, you accept its flaws, thankful simply for a roof, a hearth, and the will of those who refuse to be broken. The draughty homestead settles into memory as you wander on, and in its place rises the creak of wagon wheels, the clatter of nails on wood, and the sharp scent of sawdust. Before you lies something remarkable: neat stacks of lumber, bundles of shingles, crates stamped with distant city names. You've arrived at a spot where the railroad has delivered a miracle of modern convenience: a prefabricated house, ordered by catalogue, arriving piece by piece to be nailed together on the frontier. It is well recorded that by the 1870s and 1880s, mail-order homes began to spread across the American West. Companies advertised entire house kits, shipped by rail in sections, complete with instructions and nails. For families who had survived a first brutal winter in a soddy or dugout, the arrival of these prefabs was like stepping from one century into another. Within weeks, rough cabins could be replaced by sturdier, more comfortable houses. A charming detail appears in advertisements from the time. Some kits even included decorative trim and glass windows, luxuries unthinkable in earlier shelters. Imagine unpacking a crate on the prairie and pulling out gingerbread trim for your eaves, a whimsical touch against the stark emptiness of snow and wind. Neighbors must have stared in wonder at houses that looked almost elegant amid endless sod roofs and patched shanties. Specialists continue to debate how common these prefab homes truly were. Some argue they remained rare, accessible only to wealthier settlers near rail lines. Others suggest they spread widely, becoming a symbol of progress in even remote regions. Letters and photographs provide glimpses, but the scale remains uncertain. What is clear is the sense of pride and relief these homes inspired when they did appear. Imagine opening the crates yourself. Boards, cut to size, lie neatly stacked. Windows gleam faintly under layers of straw packing. Bundles of shingles give off the resinous scent of pine. Instructions, simple sketches, printed in fading ink, tell you where each piece should go. You and your neighbors lift beams, hammer planks, nail walls together. The rhythm of hammers echoes across the prairie, steady and hopeful. The structure rises quickly. Walls are lined neatly, corners tight. A roof slopes overhead, shedding snow instead of sagging beneath it. Shutters swing open and closed, their edges snug. Glass windows reflect the pale light, frost tracing lace-like patterns across their panes. When you step inside, you feel the difference immediately. No wide cracks, no sagging sod, no endless draft. It is still plain, but solid, designed with precision rather than desperation. The sensory world of this new home feels strange at first. The floorboards creak but hold firm, smooth under your boots compared to earth or straw. The walls smell faintly of sawdust and resin, still fresh from the mill. The air inside warms more evenly, the fire's heat caught by careful construction. You run your hand along the trim, feeling grooves carved by machines rather than improvised with knives. There is pride in this touch, a sense that you have stepped into something lasting. Evenings in such houses carried a new rhythm. Families gathered around tables set squarely against straight walls, not leaning against patched sod or bulging dugout beams. Quilts hung neatly from pegs, rather than stuffed into cracks. Lantern light gleamed on glass, illuminating faces more clearly than ever before. Meals tasted the same. Beans, bread, coffee, but felt different, eaten in a room that didn't groan with each gust of wind. And yet, these prefab homes were not without irony. They represented progress, yes, but also dependence on distant factories and railroads. You picture yourself musing on that fact, how survival now comes not only from local ingenuity, but from crates shipped hundreds of miles. There is gratitude, but also unease. A reminder that even in self-reliance, the frontier was tied to threads stretching back east. Neighbors often came to marvel. They stepped inside, eyes wide, running hands along the smooth boards, peering through glass panes, exclaiming over the straightness of the walls. Some teased, calling it fancy, while others envied openly. A house like this wasn't just warmer, it carried a whisper of status, a claim that you were not only surviving but advancing. Winter storms still pressed against the walls, of course. Snow piled high, winds howled, frost crawled across glass. But inside, the home held steady. No smoke poured back down the chimney. No mud dripped from sod ceilings. You lie in bed beneath quilts, listening to the storm batter the walls. And for once you feel confident. The house does not tremble. It shelters. The sensory contrasts are striking. The steady glow of a lantern undisturbed by drafts. The smooth creak of boards rather than the squelch of damp earth. The scent of wood smoke mixing with resin, not mud. The feel of polished trim beneath your fingertips instead of rags stuffed into holes. It is all new, all strangely luxurious, even though the home itself remains simple. As you settle into this prefab structure in your imagination, you feel both comfort and awe. Comfort, because the cold no longer claws quite so hard. Awe, because in just days you went from sod and straw to something that feels like civilization. You close your eyes, quilt drawn up, listening to the faint hum of wind outside while inside, warmth lingers steady. You realize that for many settlers, these houses marked not only survival but arrival, the moment when the frontier began to feel like home rather than exile. And as you drift towards sleep, you feel the pride they must have felt, the satisfaction of walls built square, roofs holding firm, and windows gleaming faintly in the firelight. The wilderness has not been conquered. Not yet, but here, in your prefabricated refuge, you have carved out a corner of it to call your own. The neat corners of the prefabricated house linger in your thoughts, the smoothness of machine-cut boards and glass panes. But as you walk further into the winter landscape, you notice a small detail on another homestead. Shutters drawn tightly against the storm, panes covered not in glass but in curious substitutes. In the Wild West, windows were both blessing and curse, and families learned quickly that they could mean the difference between freezing winds and fragile warmth. Contemporary letters and building accounts tell us that settlers experimented endlessly with windows. Glass was expensive and fragile, often arriving by wagon in rare crates, if at all. Many families relied instead on oiled paper stretched across frames, translucent enough to admit pale light while blocking the worst of the drafts. Others used thin sheets of mica, a mineral that could be split into clear panes, giving a shimmer of glass without the same brittleness. These improvised windows glowed strangely in firelight, giving rooms an amber sheen. A curious little story circulates in homesteader diaries. Some families saved every scrap of glass they could find, even broken bottles, and set them into frames with clay, creating patchwork windows that cast rainbows when sunlight struck. Imagine standing in a sod house where light filtered through jagged shards, scattering color across quilts and walls, a frontier stained glass born from desperation and creativity. Experts still debate how much windows actually improved winter survival. Some argue that even oiled paper or mica made a difference in morale, if not in warmth, giving families a sense of connection to daylight. Others point out that windows, no matter the material, were weak points for drafts. To many, heavy shutters mattered far more, slammed shut during storms to seal the house tight. Picture yourself inside one of these cabins now. A shutter creaks as you swing it closed, iron hinges groaning, wood heavy in your hands. Once latched, the roar of wind dulls to a muffled growl. The room grows darker, lantern light glowing warmer against walls lined with quilts. You press your palm against the shutter and feel its rough grain, solid and cold, but a firm barrier between you and the blizzard outside. The sensory impressions gather thick. The smell of resin and smoke hangs in the air, tinged with the faint mustiness of oiled paper stretched over the small window. You can taste the bitterness of coffee boiling on the stove, the flavor sharp on your tongue. The sound of the storm thuds faintly, snow hissing against the walls, but the shuttered window holds. You run your hand across its frame, the edges patched with rags to block the draft, and realize how fragile and ingenious this arrangement really is. For many, winter evenings meant carefully balancing light and warmth. Leave the shutter open, and daylight or moonlight streams in, but the cold follows. Close it tight, and the cabin grows dim, shadows deepening, the world outside vanishing. Families learn to live in twilight, their days measured more by the fire's glow than by the Sunday. You can imagine the hush of a room with shutters drawn, the only light flickering across faces bent over sewing or books, the silence broken by the scratch of a quill or the click of knitting needles. Neighbors often commented on the variety of window coverings. Some cabins boasted true glass panes, precious and rare, guarded fiercely. Others showed only waxed cloth fluttering faintly. Travelers wrote of the strange beauty of mica panes, shimmering like frozen water, their glow soft and dreamlike. You picture yourself staring through one now, watching the storm beyond blur into shapes of grey and white, distant and unreal. Of course, windows carried risks. Fragile glass shattered easily when branches whipped in storms. Paper tore, mica cracked, shutters blew loose. Every winter meant repairs, nailing, patching, stuffing cloth into gaps. A window never stopped being a weak point. You imagine lying in bed, hearing the shutter bang loose in the wind, groaning as you rise to fix it, snow biting your face while you hammer it closed again. Yet despite their flaws, windows brought something intangible: hope, to wake and see dawn light, however dim, filtering through oiled paper, gave the sense that the world still turned. To glimpse snow sparkling outside, even through mica, reminded families of beauty amid hardship. In this way, windows were more than openings. They were small promises that the wilderness had not swallowed all light. The textures of these windows stay vivid in your imagination. The waxy slickness of oiled paper under your fingertips, the brittle smoothness of mica, flaking slightly at the edges, the gritty strength of shutters, cold iron latches clicking shut, the amber glow of lamplight bouncing off patched frames. Each detail tells a story of survival cobbled together from what was at hand. You close your eyes and imagine lying beneath a quilt, shutters sealed, lantern dimmed. The cabin is dark but not empty. The fire crackles, the wind hums faintly. The air feels thick with warmth. Beyond the shuttered window, snow piles high, the wilderness pressing close. But here you are sheltered, wrapped not only in quilts, but in the cleverness of those who turned rags, paper, mica, and wood into fragile defenses. As sleep drifts near, you feel gratitude for even this modest shield. The window may be patched, the shutter may groan, but together they hold the night back. Tomorrow you may repair the frame again, paste more paper, tighten the latch. Tonight, though, the storm stays outside, and inside, in this dim amber glow, you rest safe. The dim glow of lanterns against mica panes fades from your imagination, and now your eyes lift toward the roofs above. The wind whistles differently here through rafters, across shingles, rattling sod. A roof is more than just a lid overhead on the frontier. It is a shield against weight, storm, and collapse. And in winter, when snow falls heavy and unrelenting, the wrong roof can mean disaster. It is well documented in settler journals and construction guides that roof design was critical to survival. A steep pitch was favored in snowy regions, so drifts slid away before they could pile high and break beams. In other places, families layered sod thick on flat roofs, using grass and soil as insulation. Some even thatched with bundles of straw, the golden stalks woven tight to shed water and trap warmth. Each choice carried trade-offs, each one a gamble against the season. One curious account describes families who greased their thatch roofs with lard, believing the slick surface would shed snow and rain more quickly. Neighbors teased them for wasting precious fat, but when storms came, the greased roofs often fared better, sending snow sliding off in great sheets. Imagine standing inside, hearing a whoosh as an avalanche of snow dropped suddenly, the roof above still intact. Scholars continue to debate which roof type provided the best balance of insulation and durability. Some argue sod roofs, despite leaks and rodents, kept homes far warmer. Others maintain that steep shingle or plank roofs, though colder, were safer in heavy snows. The evidence is mixed, reflecting the variety of climates and materials across the West. What is certain is that every settler had to make the roof decision early, knowing it could spell the difference between life and ruin. Picture yourself climbing onto such a roof in your imagination. The boards creak under your weight, cold wind biting your cheeks. You spread sod across beams, the clumps heavy and damp in your hands. The smell is strong, earth and grass mingled, rich and loamy. Your fingers grow numb, mud freezing against your gloves. But you keep spreading, layering the earth thicker, pressing it down so it won't shift. Each patch feels like armor added to the fragile shell of your home. Or perhaps you're hammering shingles into place, the sharp scent of pine filling your nostrils. The metallic ring of nails echoes in the crisp air, steady and rhythmic. Shingles clatter as you fit them, each one overlapping, creating a pattern that feels reassuring in its order. Snowflakes land on your shoulders, melting into cold droplets, but you keep working knowing a storm may sweep through at any moment. Inside, the differences are palpable. Beneath sod, the room feels heavy and hushed, as though the earth itself presses down, insulating sound as much as warmth. You touch the ceiling and feel the faint dampness of soil, the occasional crumble of dirt drifting down. Beneath shingles, the soundscape is sharper, the tap of sleet rattling like beads, the thud of snow sliding, the occasional creak as beams strain. Both are flawed, both are protective, and both are reminders that no roof here is free of worry. Families often told stories of roofs failing in storms. One diary recalls a sod roof sagging so low under snow that the family spent the night propping beams with broom handles to keep it from caving. Another describes shingles ripped away in gales, leaving holes that had to be patched with quilts nailed across them until spring. The sound of a roof failing was every settler's nightmare, the sharp crack of timber, the sudden roar of snow tumbling inside. You imagine lying in bed, heart racing, as you hear that ominous groan above your head. But roofs were not only defense, they were also places of small, strange beauty. Children sometimes played on sod roofs in summer, lying among wildflowers sprouting there, their laughter drifting down into the house below. Women climbed ladders to spread quilts across shingles, sun-bleaching fabric in the open air. In winter, icicles hung from eaves, glittering in moonlight like daggers of glass. Even in hardship, roofs gave families moments of wonder. The textures remain vivid in your mind, the rough scratch of straw thatch brushing your hands, the cool smoothness of pine shingles, the gritty crumble of sod between your fingers, the smell of earth, resin, and frozen air mingling together, the sound of sleet drumming overhead, like impatient fingers on a drum. Each detail reminds you that the roof was both a shield and a fragile experiment, tested daily by a sky that showed no mercy. At night, you lie beneath it, quilt wrapped tight, listening to every sound. A creak makes you tense, a thud makes you hold your breath. When snow slides away, you sigh with relief. When silence holds too long, you worry it is building weight ready to collapse. And yet, through the long months, the roof endures. Imperfect, patched, flawed, but it endures. And as your eyelids grow heavy, you think of the families who lay beneath these roofs, whispering prayers that the beams would hold, dreaming of spring when the burden above would finally melt away. You too breathe slowly, listening to the storm overhead, trusting that for this night at least, the roof will not fail. The groan of snow-laden roofs lingers in your thoughts as you step into another kind of frontier experiment, not in walls or ceilings, but in the very bones of a home. The Wild West was a place where people built with whatever they had, and sometimes what they had was neither logs nor sod, but stone. You find yourself standing before a small cottage of rough grey blocks, its walls uneven, its chimney rising stoutly, a stone house heavy, immovable, stubborn against the wind. Contemporary accounts confirm that settlers who found themselves near quarries or rocky hillsides often turned to stone when wood was scarce. The material was durable, fireproof, and resistant to the endless chewing of wind. Unlike sod, it did not sag or rot. Unlike logs, it did not creak or shrink. A stone home, once built, promised permanence, at least in theory. An unusual detail appears in the journals of one Nebraska homesteader. He wrote of mixing clay and ashes into the mortar, claiming it made the joints tighter against frost. Neighbors laughed at him, but his cottage remained standing when others cracked in deep freezes. Imagine the smell of ash-laced mortar as it was smeared between stones, sharp and smoky even as it hardened into strength. Scholars remain divided over how practical stone houses really were in the West. Some argue they were marvels of insulation, holding steady warmth once heated. Others insist they were too cold to begin with, taking hours of fire just to push back the chill of thick walls. Even today, debates linger about whether stone was a wise choice or a romantic folly carried over from Europe. Step inside with your imagination. The air feels cool, heavy, almost damp. Your boots echo slightly on a stone floor, and the sound reverberates oddly in the small space. The walls loom thick around you, rough to touch, grains of grit rubbing against your fingertips. They smell faintly of dust and minerals, earthy and enduring. At the center burns a fire in a stout hearth, the flames licking upward, heat radiating but never quite reaching the corners. You sit close to the blaze, quilt draped around your shoulders. The stone behind you chills your back even as the fire warms your face. This duality defines life here. The walls strong, immovable, but reluctant to share their heat. It takes patience, long hours of stoking and tending before warmth seeps deep into the room. When it finally does, though, it lingers, the stones radiating back what they have absorbed, a slow, steady release through the long night. The sensory details sharpen. The crackle of fire echoes against stone, louder than in wood cabins. Shadows ripple up the walls, distorted by uneven surfaces. The air smells richer here, smoke mingled with the mineral tang of stone and damp mortar. You taste the faint grit of dust stirred up by your own movements. Every sense tells you this house is different, less yielding, more ancient than the timber and sod shelters scattered across the plains. Families who lived in stone cottages often noted both their blessings and their curses. Leaks were rare, collapse unlikely, but when frost crept in, it lingered. Some settlers complained that their walls wept water, condensation dripping in rivulets when fires finally warmed the rooms. You picture yourself lying awake, quilt tight, listening to the slow drip-drip of water-down stone, each drop a reminder that even solid walls cannot banish the elements entirely. Children sometimes played games with the stones, counting their ridges, tracing shapes in their uneven patterns. Women decorated walls with quilts or whitewash, trying to brighten the grey heaviness. Men took pride in the permanence, pointing out that their homes would still stand when wood cabins rotted. And indeed, many stone houses did endure, relics on the landscape long after sod roofs crumbled away. Yet the effort to build one was immense. Stones had to be hauled, shaped, stacked with care. Mortar had to be mixed and reapplied constantly. The work was backbreaking, far more so than cutting logs or stacking sod. You imagine your hands raw from lifting, your back aching from bending, your breath clouding in the cold air as you struggle to shape permanence from stubborn rock. Still, the psychological comfort mattered. Families spoke of feeling safer, stronger, less at the mercy of wind and fire. Sitting in a stone house during a blizzard gave a sense of fortress-like stability. Outside, snow might swirl high, but inside, the walls stood silent and unyielding. You lean against them now in your imagination, their rough texture pressing into your shoulder, and feel a steadiness that seeps deeper than warmth. At night, the cottage glows with firelight, its walls flickering with orange and gold. The sound of the storm outside seems muffled, subdued by thickness. You sip coffee from a tin cup, the warmth spreading through you as the stones radiate slowly. Your eyes grow heavy, lulled by the stillness, the weight of the walls holding the night at bay. The roof may still creak, the chimney may still smoke, but the stone itself endures. And as you drift asleep in this imagined cottage, you sense what settlers must have felt, that among all the fragile shelters of the frontier, this one might truly outlast them, a stubborn monument to human persistence etched in rock. The grey solidity of stone fades behind your eyelids, and when you open them again, you are walking through a settlement where no single family lives alone. The sound of many voices drifts in the cold night air, children calling, women laughing, the rhythmic hum of hymn-like singing. Lamps glow behind many windows clustered close together. You've entered a communal shelter, a place where settlers pooled labor, resources, and space to endure winters as a group rather than alone. It is a well-acknowledged fact that across the frontier, religious and utopian communities often built longhouses, blockhouses, or dormitory-style shelters. Groups like the Shakers, or small sects inspired by faith and mutual survival, erected shared halls where dozens lived side by side. The logic was simple. Many hands made light work, and many bodies under one roof created warmth that no family could muster alone. One quirky note survives from such communities. Some constructed sleeping platforms in tiers, almost like shelves, where families lay above one another. The higher tiers stayed warmer as heat rose, so arguments sometimes broke out over who slept where. Imagine clambering up a ladder to your shelf, quilt bundled in your arms, laughing nervously as you found yourself stacked above neighbors like loaves of bread. There is continuing scholarly debate about whether communal living on the frontier fostered harmony or bred conflict. Some sources describe evenings filled with song, shared meals, and deep spiritual fellowship. Others recall quarrels, jealousy, and constant irritation from the lack of privacy. Historians note that the line between sanctuary and pressure cooker was thin, and winter could push even the most cooperative souls to their limits. Picture yourself entering one of these great halls now. The door swings wide, and a rush of warm air envelops you. The scent of stew, smoke, and dozens of bodies hits at once. The space is wide but crowded. Long tables stretched down the center, benches on either side, a massive stove glowing at one end. Lanterns hang from rafters, their light bouncing off beams that creak faintly with the wind. The murmur of voices fills every corner, a constant low tide of sound. You find a spot near the stove. The warmth radiates across your face, and you pull the quilt tighter as you watch families bustling around you. Women stir kettles, children run in circles, men repair boots or mend tools by lantern light. The floorboards vibrate with footsteps, every movement amplified by the shared space. Privacy does not exist here. Instead, there is a shared rhythm, a communal heartbeat. The sensory details are rich. The air smells of wood smoke mixed with cabbage stew and the faint sourness of damp wool drying near the stove. Your ears catch laughter, then a baby's cry, then the sound of someone strumming a hymn on a fiddle. Your fingertips brush the rough grain of the long bench beneath you, sticky with spilled broth. Your mouth tastes salt and warmth as you sip from a tin mug passed your way. Every sense tells you that survival here is crowded, noisy, but undeniably human. At night, the hall transforms. Quilts are spread across platforms and benches. Lanterns are dimmed, shadows rising like curtains. The sounds shift, no longer lively conversation, but snores, whispers, restless shifting. You lie shoulder to shoulder with neighbors, the quilt barely enough to shield you from the press of elbows. Above you, others shift on higher bunks, their weight creaking the beams. The air is stuffy, thick with the breath of dozens, and yet you feel strangely reassured. You are not alone in the dark. Communal life offered protection in storms. When roofs leaked, everyone patched together. When wood ran low, the strongest men cut more as others tended fires. When sickness struck, neighbors shared remedies and watched over one another's children. You picture a night when snow piled so high against doors they could not be opened. Instead of despair, the hall filled with singing, voices rising until the storm outside seemed irrelevant. The walls might shake, but the spirit inside held firm. Of course, tensions brewed as well. Quarrels flared over chores, over noise, over space. Someone's cough kept others awake. Someone's boots smelled worse than the rest. Secrets were impossible, and tempers sometimes snapped. Imagine lying awake as voices rise in anger, only to be hushed by a hymn or a shared prayer. The hall was a crucible, burning away selfishness but also patience. The sensory textures remain vivid, the rough wool quilt scratchy against your chin, the creak of benches shifting as sleepers roll, the glow of embers in the great stove, faint but steady, the faint taste of salt still on your lips from supper, the warmth of shoulders pressed close, the steady chorus of breath around you. All of it pulls you deeper into the rhythm of communal survival. By morning, the hall wakes together. The air fills again with clatter pots banging, children laughing, boots thudding. Steam rises from kettles, filling the rafters with warmth. You stretch stiff limbs, grateful for rest even in crowded quarters. Outside, the snow still lies heavy, but inside, the community hums onward. One breath, one voice, one stubborn will. As your own eyes grow heavy, you think of the settlers who slept in such halls, their dreams mingling in the shared air. The walls did not just hold heat, they held the strength of togetherness. And tonight, in your imagination, you too are part of that circle, one quilt among many, one breath among dozens, safe within the collective embrace. The hum of the communal hall softens in your mind, and when you open your eyes again, the world feels much lonelier. The voices are gone. Instead, you hear the muffled sweep of snow over plains, the faint groan of wood against wind, and the low rumble of your own stomach. You've arrived at a trapper's cabin far off the trail, or perhaps a widow's soddy on the edge of settlement, where one person faces the winter entirely alone. Solitude, as much as the cold, becomes the enemy. Contemporary letters and diaries attest that isolation was one of the greatest challenges for frontier dwellers. Men and women lived entire winters without seeing another soul, their only company the crackle of fire and the howl of coyotes. Loneliness gnawed as fiercely as hunger, and the walls of small shelters often echoed more with silence than with song. One peculiar story comes from a Dakota homesteader who claimed he kept a crow as a companion, feeding it scraps and talking to it nightly as though it were a neighbor. When spring arrived, he admitted he had forgotten how to greet a man properly. Imagine sitting in a one-room cabin, whispering to a bird perched on the rafters, its black eyes glittering in the firelight as if it really understood. Historians still disagree on how people endured such solitude. Some argue that strong faith and the rhythm of daily chores anchored settlers, keeping their minds steady. Others suggest many suffered quietly from what we might now call depression, their spirits eroded by silence. The truth is likely both. Some thrived in solitude, while others barely held on. Picture yourself now in one of those solitary shelters. The room is small, the roof low, the walls lined with rough sod or logs. A single stove burns weakly, and the only sound is its occasional crackle. You sit alone at a crude table, quilt wrapped tight around your shoulders, staring at a tin plate scraped clean of supper. Your breath feels loud in the stillness. Each shift of your body echoes as though the walls themselves are listening. The sensory details are sharp because nothing distracts you. The smell of smoke lingers heavy, clinging to every surface. The taste of coffee is bitter, metallic from the tin mug. The floor beneath your boots is gritty, dust and straw crunching faintly as you move. The silence hums in your ears, broken only by wind rattling shutters or snow slipping from the roof. Every small sensation seems magnified because there is nothing else to fill the void. Nights are the hardest. You lie on a straw mattress, quilt pulled close, and hear the creak of the roof timbers, the distant howl of wolves. Each sound makes you flinch, because you know no one else will rise to check the door, no one else will bank the fire if it goes out. You stare into the dark, listening to your own heart thud, and realize how much comfort other people's breathing once brought. To fight the emptiness, settlers turned to rituals. Some read the same passages of scripture aloud each night, their voices steadying them. Others wrote letters they could not yet send, filling page after page with thoughts as though speaking to distant family. A few carved notches into beams, marking each day survived. You imagine taking a knife to the wall, scratching another line, the sound sharp in the quiet proof that you are still here. And sometimes, imagination itself became company. One journal describes a woman setting extra plates at her table, speaking aloud as if her family was still alive. Another man admitted to singing entire conversations, assigning parts to the wind and to himself. It seems strange, almost desperate, but when you are alone for months, even pretend voices can feel like salvation. Yet solitude had its strange beauties too. Without noise, settlers noticed details. Others missed the way frost spread delicate lace across window frames, the exact pitch of wind against shingles, the smell of fresh snow as it drifted through cracks. You picture yourself standing in the doorway, wrapped in a quilt, staring out at a moonlit plain so silent it seems sacred. For a moment, the loneliness feels less like punishment and more like communion. Still, the dangers were real. Injury could mean death with no one to fetch help. Illness could steal strength before spring arrived. Fires could start, and with no neighbor to douse them, everything could vanish in minutes. You lie awake at night, imagining each possibility, heart heavy, with the knowledge that survival rests only on your own vigilance. The textures of solitude remain vivid, the scratch of your quilt, the uneven straw poking through the mattress, the bitter taste of stew eaten in silence, the heavy stillness pressing on your ears until you almost crave the noise of a crowded bunkhouse again, the flicker of firelight across walls that never change, night after night. And yet, as you sit in this lonely cabin of your imagination, you feel a strange resilience. There is no one else to bank the fire, so you do it. No one else to haul wood, so you rise and do it. No one else to watch the door, so you keep watch. Each act of survival becomes a statement. I endure. The silence, while heavy, also whispers a truth that you are capable of standing against it. As your eyelids grow heavy, you imagine what solitary settlers must have dreamed, of neighbors returning, of spring thaw, of laughter filling the silence. You too drift toward that dream, quilt pulled close, heart steadying against the quiet. Alone, yes, but not defeated. In the vast hush of winter, you are still here, and sometimes that is victory enough. The silence of that solitary cabin softens in your mind, and gradually another sound rises, a steady pounding of hooves on frozen ground, bells jingling faintly, men calling out to one another. You turn and see a line of covered wagons, canvas stretched tight over bent ribs of wood, snow dusting the tops like sugar on bread. These wagons, rolling shelters of wood and cloth, often became winter homes when settlers were caught between destinations. It is well established that wagon trains sometimes halted for months when snowstorms trapped them. Instead of building permanent cabins, families lived directly in their wagons, clustering them in circles for protection. The canvas was waterproofed with oil or wax, and quilts hung along the inside to trap warmth. Floors were layered with straw or animal hides. Fragile as they were, these moving homes carried families through blizzards when there was no time or strength to construct anything else. A curious anecdote comes from one emigrant's diary, describing how children drew faces on the frosted canvas walls with their fingers, laughing as breath fogged the air inside. She wrote that, "Our wagon felt like a cave of frost, beautiful and terrible at once. You can almost picture the tiny drawings, smiling shapes etched in ice crystals that melted by morning, only to reappear with the next freeze." There is disagreement among historians about whether wagons were ever truly adequate as winter homes. Some accounts praise them as snug enough, especially when clustered together, the circle breaking the worst of the wind. Others emphasize the misery, the dampness, the cramped quarters, the way smoke from makeshift stoves clung to canvas and made breathing harsh. Diaries confirm both sides' comfort for some, torment for others. Step inside one now in your imagination. You duck under the canvas flap, quilt pulled tight around you. The air smells of damp fabric, straw, and faint smoke. A lantern hangs low, its glow soft and golden against the curved ribs. Children huddle at the far end, tucked under quilts, their breath steaming faintly. You touch the canvas wall, it is cold, stiff with frost, but it holds against the wind. Snow thuds softly as flakes slide off outside, muffling the world. The sensory world is close and crowded. Straw rustles beneath your boots. The canvas roof creaks faintly as gusts press against it. The fire from a small brazier glows uncertainly, its warmth patchy, its smoke biting your throat. You taste salt pork stew from a tin bowl, the flavor thick but comforting. You run your hand across the wooden floorboards of the wagon bed, their surface smooth and worn from miles of travel. At night, the wagon feels both safe and fragile. You lie beneath a quilt, the canvas above glowing faintly from moonlight outside. Every gust of wind rattles the ribs. Every creak makes you wonder if the canvas might rip, leaving you exposed. Yet you also feel comfort, the nearness of your family around you, the muffled sound of neighbors in wagons close by. Outside, wolves may howl, but the circle of wagons forms a barricade of both wood and will. Daily routines inside wagons were cramped. Meals cooked in small pots, eaten with knees touching. Clothes dried on lines strung across the ribs, dripping slowly onto straw. Children played quietly with carved toys or whispered stories to each other under quilts. Adults mended clothing by lantern light, the needles clicking softly. The air was heavy, but each small act filled the space with rhythm, enough to distract from the storm beyond. Neighbors often helped one another in these wagon villages. Men shoveled paths between wagons, piling snow high to act as extra walls. Women shared food, trading flour for beans, molasses for coffee. Children ran from wagon to wagon, squealing with laughter despite the cold, their cheeks red, their mittens stiff with frost. A circle of wagons became not just shelter but a temporary town, a fragile bubble of humanity in the wilderness. Yet dangers were constant. Fires could spread quickly, canvas igniting with terrifying speed. Smoke filled the small spaces, leaving eyes stinging and lungs aching. Supplies dwindled, and hunger gnawed at patience. Imagine sitting inside, your stomach empty, listening to the wind howl, and wondering if the circle would outlast the storm. The wagons seemed strong in numbers, but each was still a shell of canvas and wood, vulnerable to every gust. Still, there were moments of warmth. Songs rose from one wagon, carried softly through the canvas to others. A fiddle scraped out a tune, children hummed along, and the circle felt almost festive despite the storm. You imagine lying on your straw mattress, hearing music drift through frosted walls, smiling faintly even as you shivered. Hope, like heat, travelled from wagon to wagon, sustaining the camp. The textures linger in your mind. The rough weave of canvas under your palm, stiff with frost. The sharp tang of smoke on your tongue. The creak of wagon wheels shifting slightly as snow piled against them. The flicker of lantern light across curved ribs, casting shadows that swayed like branches. Each detail reminds you how fragile and yet how stubborn these shelters were. As you close your eyes now, quilt pulled tight, you picture yourself inside one of those canvas caves, huddled with family, listening to the storm pound outside. The wagons groan, the canvas rattles, but the circle holds. Tomorrow may bring hunger, repairs, or more snow, but tonight, the lantern still glows, the stew still warms, and the laughter of children still lingers. And that is enough. You drift, comforted by the knowledge that even canvas stretched thin could become a fortress, so long as hearts within it beat together. The circle of covered wagons fades, their canvas flaps glowing faintly in memory, and now you hear a different rhythm, boots clattering on planks, the sharp ring of a hammer against iron, the low rumble of voices echoing off canyon walls. You've come to a frontier town, hurried into existence by gold, silver, cattle, or the railroad. Here, winter shelters were not scattered sod huts or lonely dugouts, but hastily built hotels, boarding houses, and clapboard saloons, all meant to house bodies and bustle even when the snow pressed deep. It is well documented in town records that these structures rose almost overnight. Lumber was dragged in by wagon or shipped on the rails, and within days, whole rows of false front buildings lined muddy streets. Behind the facades, though, interiors were crude plank walls with gaps stuffed by rags, roofs patched with tar paper, stoves that smoked as often as they warmed. Yet they offered something rare on the frontier: company, light, and the illusion of permanence. A curious detail crops up in the memoir of a Kansas shopkeeper. Boarding houses often crammed 3 or 4 men into one bed, their boots still on, because warmth mattered more than dignity. Strangers woke tangled together, grumbling but alive. The keeper dryly noted that the surest guarantee of winter survival was the smell of another man's socks beside you. You can almost feel the awkwardness of rolling over, quilt tugged tight, your neighbor's elbow in your ribs, but thankful still for the shared heat. Historians still debate whether these town shelters were genuinely safer than isolated homesteads. Some argue they provided better resources, wood deliveries, communal stoves, doctors nearby. Others emphasize that disease spread quickly in crowded quarters. Fires tore through towns like matches on straw, and tempers flared easily when so many souls were jammed together. The truth, like the town itself, was rough, noisy, and uneven. Step inside one now in your imagination. You push open a creaking door, and a wave of heat and noise greets you. The air is thick with tobacco smoke, kerosene fumes, and the scent of unwashed wool. Voices rise in argument and laughter. A stove glows red in the corner, its iron belly rattling as someone feeds it another log. Light spills from lanterns, reflecting on plank walls nailed hastily but standing firm. You find a bunk in a corner. The straw mattress crunches beneath you, and you pull the quilt tighter as boots stomp around the room. The smell is overwhelming: sweat, damp leather, stale beer, but the warmth seeps into your bones. You run your hand along the wall, feeling rough splinters catch your fingertips. Smoke curls thick, stinging your eyes. But you breathe it in anyway, grateful to be out of the biting wind. The sensory noise is endless. Laughter bursts from a card game at a nearby table. Mugs clatter, a piano bangs out a ragged tune in the saloon below. Boots scrape against floorboards, chairs creak, someone snores already, dead asleep despite the din. The floor trembles faintly with every gust outside, but the walls hold, and that is all that matters. At night, these town shelters grew wilder. In some, songs and fiddle tunes filled the air until dawn. In others, arguments turned to brawls, fists slamming against walls, voices shouting curses that echoed into the night. You imagine lying in your bunk, half asleep, quilt pulled over your head, listening to a scuffle break out across the room. The noise is unnerving, but in its own way, it is comforting proof that you are not alone in the vast winter dark. Meals were often communal, eaten at long tables in boarding houses or saloons. Plates of beans, bread, and salted meat were shoveled out quickly, washed down with strong coffee or stronger whiskey. The taste was rough, sometimes bitter with soot from poorly kept stoves, but the act of eating together gave men and women alike a sense of belonging. You picture yourself chewing tough bread, laughing at a stranger's joke, your voice joining the chorus of tired, hungry, hopeful survivors. The dangers of town life remained ever present. Fires started easily. One tipped lantern could consume half a block in minutes. Disease swept quickly through crowded rooms, coughs spreading faster than winter winds. Violence simmered beneath the surface, quarrels fueled by drink or desperation. Yet despite all this, people flocked to towns in winter, preferring noisy imperfection to silent isolation. The textures of town shelters remain sharp in your mind. The sticky grain of tables, scarred by knives and spilled ale. The prickling itch of straw poking through thin mattresses. The clatter of boots above your head in an upstairs bunkhouse. The flicker of lamplight on plastered cracks stuffed with rags. Each detail speaks of a world patched together in haste, but alive with resilience. Imagine drifting to sleep in such a place. The stove hums steady, voices murmur into silence, and snores rise like waves. Outside, snow piles against clapboard walls, muffling the world. Inside, the air is warm, the room is alive, and you sink deeper into your quilt, grateful for company even in chaos. In the Wild West, winter shelters were never perfect, but in towns, they offered a rare thing: the sense of humanity pressing close, refusing to yield to the emptiness of the frontier. And tonight, in your imagination, you are part of that noise, that warmth, that stubborn community safe beneath boards hammered in haste but holding strong. The racket of the frontier town, the piano clanging, the boots stomping, the muffled snores fades into silence. When you open your eyes again, you're no longer inside a boarding house or saloon but standing in the middle of open prairie. The horizon is a sheet of white, the air sharp as needles in your lungs. There are no trees, no hills, no stones to shape into walls, only endless grassland, now frozen stiff. Out here, families turned to the ground itself, cutting blocks of sod to build homes that seemed half buried and half alive. The soddy part hut, part cave, was one of the most iconic shelters of the West. It is widely recorded in homestead applications and letters that sod houses were especially common across Nebraska, Kansas, and the Dakotas, where timber was scarce but prairie grass ran deep. Settlers cut thick rectangles of turf, roots and soil clinging together, and stacked them like bricks. Roofs were layered the same way, sometimes with brush or canvas beneath to catch falling dirt. It was messy, crude, and damp, but it kept the wind out, and in winter, that was enough. An unusual detail often noted in diaries is that prairie flowers sometimes sprouted from sod roofs come spring. Families told of waking to daisies nodding above their heads, roots dangling faintly through cracks. Children laughed at petals dropping into their porridge. Imagine lying beneath a quilt in winter, staring up at the ceiling, already knowing it would bloom with wildflowers when the snow melted. There is still discussion among historians about whether soddies were truly effective against the cold. Some argue they provided excellent insulation, their thick walls holding warmth like ovens once a fire was built. Others insist they were damp, drafty, and riddled with pests. Letters reveal both sides. One woman praised hers as the warmest house I have known, while another called hers a kennel for mice and snakes. Perhaps both were right, depending on how carefully the walls were cut and stacked. Step inside a soddy now in your imagination. The ceiling is low, the walls dark and uneven, roots dangling in tufts. You run your hand along the wall and feel grit crumble into your palm, cold and damp. The air smells strongly of earth and smoke, a heavy scent that clings to your clothes. The floor beneath you is bare ground, covered in straw that rustles under each step. Above, smoke creeps uncertainly toward a crude chimney hole, leaving the air thick, your eyes watering. You sit on a rough bench near the fire. Heat radiates, but the walls still breathe cold, the damp pressing against your back. Your quilt feels almost essential here, wrapped tight as a second skin. Children huddle close, their laughter muffled as they chase each other in the confined space. Their footsteps thud softly, absorbed by soil. Every sound is dulled, as though you're deep underground. The sensory details weigh on you. You taste grit when you sip from your tin cup, dust shaken loose from the ceiling. You smell damp roots, mingling with beans simmering in a pot. You hear the faint squeak of a mouse in the straw, scurrying bold and unashamed. You feel the constant coolness of the earth pressing in, reminding you that this house is less built than carved from the living prairie. Yet for all its flaws, the soddy carries its own kind of comfort. Storm winds batter the prairie outside, but here you barely hear them. Snow piles high, but the walls hold steady, immovable. The soddy is heavy, rooted, less a house than a bunker. You lean into that heaviness, knowing that while it may never feel truly clean or dry, it will not blow away in the night. Families tried to brighten these earthen caves. Whitewash painted on the walls gave a faint glow, though it quickly chipped. Newspapers were pasted up as decoration, their headlines still legible, turning walls into patchwork reading material. Quilts were hung for color, adding both beauty and insulation. Imagine a child tracing letters on a newspaper wall by firelight, learning to read while wind howled beyond the sod. Still, dangers lurked. Roofs sagged under heavy snow, dripping water steadily. Insects and snakes sometimes crept down from rafters, and the dampness invited illness coughs that lingered, fevers that burned in air too moist and stagnant. Families endured because they had no choice, patching holes, chasing mice, sweeping out dirt each morning. The soddy was not loved, but it was endured. And yet, some looked back fondly. One woman wrote that though her soddy was dark and dirty, it was also the place where her children laughed, where neighbors shared coffee, where she felt safest in storms. She called it a palace of mud. Perhaps the memory of survival turned hardship into affection, or perhaps there really was a strange beauty in living inside the earth itself. As you lie on the straw mattress in your imagination, quilt tight, you hear the muffled crackle of the fire, the squeak of mice, the faint drip of water from the roof. The air is heavy, but the wind cannot reach you. Your eyes grow heavy, lulled by the stillness, by the sense of being buried just enough to outlast the night. You drift towards sleep, understanding what families must have felt. But even in dampness, in darkness, in dirt. The soddy stood as a stubborn promise that people could coax shelter from nothing but grass and soil. And tonight, within its earthen embrace, so do you. The damp weight of the soddy walls fades, and when you blink again you see a different kind of frontier shelter, one not for settlers chasing land or gold, but for travelers caught between destinations. A lone stagecoach station squats at a crossroads, its rough signs swinging in the wind, lantern light spilling faintly from a window. These way stations, scattered across the West, were built less for comfort than for necessity. Yet in the dead of winter, even a drafty station offered more hope than the frozen open trail. Stage stations were essential along routes where horses had to be changed and passengers rested briefly. It is well recorded that these buildings were crude, often little more than log or adobe huts hastily erected by stage companies. A stable for horses stood nearby, and a single common room housed passengers and drivers alike. Straw on the floor served as bedding, and meals were basic beans, bacon, coffee, and little else. But to a traveller numb with cold, these stations were lifelines. One peculiar anecdote comes from a passenger's memoir. At some stations, beds were nothing more than rawhide strips stretched across wooden frames. He described lying on one and feeling the hide creak and sag, like trying to sleep on a drum. You can imagine the sound each time someone shifted, the rawhide groaning beneath their weight, while the cold crept up from the floor. Scholars continue to debate whether these stations were reasonably dependable or notoriously miserable. Some argue they provided steady shelter and hot food, enough to keep travelers alive through brutal journeys. Others emphasize the filth vermin in the straw, smoke choking the small rooms, and prices higher than most could afford. The truth, as so often, likely lies somewhere in between. Step inside one now in your imagination. The door swings open, hinges groaning, and you're greeted by the scent of damp wool, horse sweat, and bacon frying faintly. The single room is dim, lantern light flickering on soot-darkened walls. A rough stove squats in the center, radiating uneven heat. Around it, passengers huddle close, shoulders touching, boots steaming faintly as the snow melts. You sit on a bench, quilt draped over your lap. The wood creaks beneath you, splintering slightly at the edges. Your fingertips run along the table, scarred by knives and mugs, sticky with spilled coffee. The floor crunches underfoot, a mix of straw and tracked-in snow. The warmth is patchy, you feel heat on your knees, while your back still shivers from the draft. Yet compared to the howling wind outside, this feels like luxury. The sounds are constant. The fire pops loudly, sending sparks against the stove walls. Horses stamp in the stable outside, their hooves thudding, breath steaming in the cold night. Inside, voices murmur low complaints about the journey, curses at the weather, a driver telling a tall tale while others chuckle wearily. Now and then a cough breaks the rhythm, reminding you how illness spread easily in such cramped spaces. At night, the station becomes crowded. Passengers roll out blankets on the floor, lying shoulder to shoulder. Some stretch out on benches, others settle uneasily into rawhide bunks. Snores rise almost immediately, mingling with the faint hiss of snow against shutters. You pull your quilt tighter, straw rustling beneath you, the scent of horses and smoke still thick in the air. Sleep comes slowly, but it comes, because exhaustion outweighs discomfort. Meals, though plain, carried their own comfort. A bowl of beans, a slab of bacon, bread hardened but still edible, these filled bellies and lifted spirits. Coffee boiled strong, bitter enough to jolt weary travellers awake. You imagine lifting a tin cup to your lips, the metal hot, the taste harsh but welcome. For a moment, warmth spreads through your body, and you almost forget the misery of the road. Travellers often wrote of the fellowship born in such places. Strangers, pressed together by circumstance, shared stories, songs, even laughter. A merchant might tell tales of the city, a rancher of cattle drives, a soldier of distant forts. The small room became a patchwork of voices, each one weaving a thread of humanity into the bleak winter night. You picture yourself leaning back, listening, eyes half closed as the murmur of voices and the crackle of the fire blend into a lullaby. But dangers lingered here too. Fires sometimes roared out of control, consuming stations in minutes. Supplies ran short, leaving travelers with empty plates. And bandits, knowing these stops were vulnerable, occasionally raided, leaving fear in their wake. Each night carried a mix of relief and unease, safety always shadowed by risk. The sensory textures linger in your mind. The rawhide bunk sagging beneath you, rough and sticky with age, the bitterness of strong coffee scalding your tongue, the acrid smell of smoke hanging thick, clinging to quilts and coats, the flickering light of lanterns casting restless shadows across tired faces. Each detail reminds you that survival here was less about comfort than endurance. And yet, as you lie back now in your imagination, quilt tight, the stove humming faintly, you understand what travelers must have felt, that even in filth and crowding, the stage station was still a blessing. It was walls against the wind, fire against the frost, human voices against the loneliness of the open prairie. Your eyes grow heavy as the fire's glow softens, voices fade, and the snow outside hushes the world. You sink deeper into your quilt, grateful for this crude sanctuary, knowing that come morning the journey will continue, but tonight you are sheltered. The crowded stage station dims in memory, its smoke-stained walls fading until you hear only the crackle of firewood and the deep hush of falling snow. Ahead of you now rises something more substantial, more carefully shaped, a log house, the kind families built once they had survived a few winters and could spare the time to cut, notch, and stack timber properly. Unlike the soddy or the wagon, the log home symbolized permanence, a commitment to the land and to survival not just for a season, but for generations. It is well known from settlement records that log houses were among the first real homes to appear as frontier families prospered. Built from nearby pine, spruce, or cottonwood, their walls were thick, the gaps sealed with clay or moss, the roofs pitched steeply to shed snow. Compared to canvas or sod, these structures offered greater security and, when well maintained, far more comfort through the long winter nights. One delightful anecdote appears in a Minnesota settler's recollections. She described hanging apples on strings across the rafters, letting them dry slowly by the hearth. Their sweet scent filled the cabin, masking smoke and dampness. Children sometimes sneaked bites, leaving half-chewed apples dangling like ornaments. You can almost imagine the laughter, the sticky fingers, the faint perfume of fruit lingering even as frost pressed at the walls. Historians still discuss whether these log homes truly solved the problem of winter survival. Some claim they were marvels of frontier craftsmanship, keeping families warm and secure. Others note that drafts still slipped through, roofs still leaked, and without constant firewood, even the sturdiest log home turned bitterly cold. As with so many shelters, the truth was both. A log house could be cozy haven or smoky misery, depending on how carefully it was built. Step inside one now in your imagination. The door creaks as you push it open, hinges groaning, and the smell of resin, wood smoke, and stew greets you. A hearth glows bright, flames licking up a stone chimney. The walls loom solid, logs stacked thick, their surfaces rough but steady. You run your hand along them, feeling grooves where bark once clung, the texture rough but reassuring. Unlike sod or canvas, the logs feel solid beneath your palm, unmoving, unyielding. The sensory details are vivid. The floor is wooden too, pine planks creaking softly under your boots. A rag rug lies near the hearth, woven in bright scraps, its surface scratchy but cheerful. Lanterns glow faintly from shelves, their light golden against the walls. The air is warm here, truly warm, not just near the fire but throughout the room, held steady by the thick logs. You taste stew heavy with beans and pork, the flavor rich, filling your belly with warmth that spreads outward. At night, the cabin becomes intimate. Quilts hang thick from pegs, softening the sound of wind outside. Children climb into lofts under the roof beams, their laughter echoing faintly as they settle under blankets. Parents sit close to the hearth, mending tools, reading by lamplight, or whispering plans for spring. You lie back on a straw mattress, quilt pulled tight, listening to the steady hum of family life, the crackle of fire, the murmur of voices, the faint creak of beams above. The rhythms of daily life here feel more stable. Each morning begins with hauling wood, chopping logs, stoking the fire high. Meals are cooked slowly over coals, their smells drifting through the room. Clothes hang to dry near the hearth, dripping snow into pans. At night, stories are told, old country tales, Bible verses, or tall yarns about wolves and spirits on the prairie. The cabin is not only shelter but theatre, school and chapel, all within one warm space. Neighbors often visited, trudging miles through snow to share coffee or check on one another. Imagine the knock at the door, the rush of icy air as it opens, the laughter of welcome as coats are hung by the fire. Voices rise together, mugs clink, songs fill the rafters. The cabin, already sturdy, becomes stronger still through companionship. Yet the dangers never fully disappear. Fires sparked from chimneys catching roofs. Logs shrank over years, leaving cracks where wind whistled through. Rodents crept into corners, gnawing at food stores. And when blizzards struck, even the stoutest log house groaned under the weight. Families huddled tighter then, praying beams would hold, shivering as drafts found their way in. You picture yourself lying awake, listening for the creak of roof timbers, hoping dawn will find the house still standing. The textures of this place remain rich in your mind. The rough wood of walls under your palm, the warm scratch of quilts against your chin, the taste of ash on bread toasted by the hearth, the smell of pine logs burning, mingling with the faint sweetness of drying apples, the glow of lanterns flickering across faces, softening them with light. And as you lie back now, quilt tight, the warmth of the fire steady, you understand why families dreamed of building such homes. Unlike sod huts or wagons, this was a statement: we will stay, we will endure, we will thrive here. The cabin is not just protection, it is a promise to the future. You let your eyelids grow heavy, comforted by the solidity around you. Outside, the storm still roars, but the log house holds fast. Inside, warmth wraps around you like the embrace of the very timbers themselves, a lullaby of strength, steadiness, and survival. The warmth of the log cabin still lingers in your imagination, but as you step onward in this journey through the frontier winter, you begin to notice how survival was never about one single type of shelter. Instead, it was the constant weaving together of improvisation, stubbornness, and small flashes of ingenuity. Every settler, whether tucked into a soddy, huddled under a wagon canvas, or sitting proudly inside a log house, faced the same unrelenting truth: the prairie's cold cared nothing for comfort. And so, people learned to adapt not only their walls and roofs but their very habits, layering survival strategies as carefully as they layered quilts on their beds. It is well recorded that families often transformed their shelters with seasonal rituals. In autumn, they sealed cracks with mud, clay, or even strips of cloth dipped in tallow. In early winter, they piled snow against outside walls, turning it into insulation rather than obstacle. And throughout the cold months, they shifted their daily lives closer and closer to the stove or hearth, shrinking the world into one warm corner while the rest of the house went dark. These rhythms became second nature, passed down year by year. One unusual anecdote comes from a Colorado homesteader who claimed his family slept in a single enormous bed piled with every quilt, coat, and blanket they owned. He remembered waking with his siblings' feet in his face, everyone packed together like spoons in a drawer. "We might have hated it in summer," he wrote, but in winter it kept us alive. You can imagine the muffled giggles under layers of wool, the warmth of body heat pressed so close that for once the wind outside seemed far away. Experts remain divided on whether these communal strategies truly lessened hardship or simply made the suffering more bearable. Some argue that small tricks like hanging damp sheets near the stove to trap sparks or lining walls with newspapers saved countless lives. Others suggest the difference was mostly psychological. The feeling of doing something gave families hope, even if the effect was modest. Still today, the debate lingers. Was survival rooted more in physical ingenuity or in sheer determination of spirit? Step into one of these winter households now in your imagination. The house may be sod, log, stone, or shingle, but the scene is familiar. Quilts hung along walls, blocking drafts, boots steaming by the fire, filling the air with the scent of leather, a pot of beans simmering slowly, the aroma mingling with smoke. Children huddle around the hearth, playing quiet games with corn-husk dolls or scratching patterns in frost along the window. Adults mend tools by dim light, their hands moving steady and sure despite the cold that creeps in whenever the fire falters. The sensory tapestry is rich. You hear the slow pop of logs in the stove, the occasional hiss as snow drips down the chimney. You smell the heavy sweetness of molasses bread, toasting near the fire, mixed with the sharp tang of kerosene from a lantern. Your fingertips trace the rough edge of a quilt pinned across a drafty door. Your lips taste salt and smoke from the evening's stew. Every sensation ties you to the space, making you feel as though you too are part of the nightly ritual of survival. Nighttime in these homes had its own rhythm. Families often went to bed early, not only to conserve candlelight, but to huddle together against the cold. You imagine slipping under a heavy quilt, straw mattress rustling beneath you, while the sound of the storm presses faintly at the walls. Each creak of the roof makes you hold your breath. Each sigh of the wind makes you pull the covers tighter. Yet the steady breathing of those beside you, or even just the steady glow of the stove, reassures you that the night can be endured. Daily chores continued no matter the cold. Firewood had to be hauled, even when frostbitten air burned lungs. Livestock had to be fed, barns checked, water melted from snow. You picture yourself stepping outside into the blizzard, shovel in hand, snow stinging your face. The house behind you glows faintly, lantern light shining through frost-covered windows. Each step back inside feels like a victory, the rush of warmth, the relief of closing the door on the storm. And while shelters varied widely, stone cottages, sod huts, log cabins, communal halls, they all carried the same essence: fragile walls standing between families and the merciless frontier. That fragility bred resilience. People patched, repaired, improvised, and endured, season after season. In their resourcefulness lies the quiet heroism of ordinary survival. The textures of these shelters stay vivid in your mind as you wander through them all again. The gritty crumble of sod, the resinous scent of pine, the creak of rawhide bunks, the shimmer of mica windows, the heavy hush of stone. Each one imperfect, each one flawed, and yet each one a testament to stubborn persistence. You realize now that there was no perfect shelter, only the will to make something, anything, stand firm against the cold. As you curl back beneath your imagined quilt, you feel a profound respect for those who faced such winters. They were not conquering heroes, but ordinary people armed with mud, straw, logs, stone, and sheer grit. Their shelters may not have been pretty, but they were proof that survival was possible in a land that seemed determined to break them. And as your breathing slows, you too settle into that truth. That survival is rarely about grand gestures. It is about patching the cracks, banking the fire, pulling the quilt closer, and finding warmth in whatever form it comes, be it sod walls, wagon canvas, or the body heat of family packed close. And now, dear listener, it is time to let go of the noise of history and sink softly into rest. The images of sod walls, log beams, stone cottages, and flickering lanterns can begin to fade, like the embers of a fire slowly dimming in the hearth. You've